Hello, hello. Oh, there we go. Now it's all nice and bright. Welcome. I am Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my garden. Actually, welcome to my basement, but we're all here to have a fun time, so does it really matter? I don't think so. I'm going to give it a moment so that people can come. I think I was a little bit early. Let's see. Yes, I was a minute early. Oh, I see if someone has joined. Welcome. While you're here, we're going to do just kind of the whole we are going to be reading the second to last chapters session chapters. So 19 to 22 today of Little Mushroom. And this will be the second to last live stream before we finish the book, which I'm super excited about. But regarding Little Mushroom, I do not own anything. I only own this physical copy right in front of me that I'll be reading from and my time. That is all I own. That is all I claim. I'm not sponsored. Just doing this because I love reading. I love Danmei, and I have the time. So yeah, because it's the second to last live stream before we finish this book, I wanted to do something special. So I actually ended up getting a blind box, which I'm going to open real quick. I really love these brands. Not sponsored, just they're cute. So I'm going to open this because I'm excited that it's the second to last one. It's going to be quick, and then we're getting right to the reading. Okay. Hi, Mo Mars Rover. And hello, whoever else is lurking. Welcome. All right, let's open this. Here, I'll scooch back so you can see. All right. Oop. Okay, I'm not going to look at who it is. Hi, Chicky, or Kiki. Sorry. All right, let's see. I'm doing a little unboxing sort of thing because it's the second to last. No way. Out of all 12, I actually ended up getting repeat. I have a couple in front of me. But she's cute, so I can have twins. I'll take twins. I'll pretend they're the Shen twins. 2 and 1, yes. So I'm going to put her, I'll put her right back here because she's connected. So she's going to be chilling over here. Oh, I think there's a stand. Yep. There's a stand. All right. So I love it. She's cheersing. She's got a little bottle of wine. Oh, that focus. And she's cheersing. We could call it tea, but I think it's probably wine. So we're going to have her cheersing and drinking, and I'll put her in the background so we can enjoy. There we go. Okay. And with that, she is so cute. Here, I can reach some of the other ones. So I've got this one, just super pretty. This is one of the first ones I got. Oh, and it just lost a wing. I will pick that up later. This is one of my favorites. She's super pretty. She's a kitsune. They have a creature series. And then this one reminds me a lot of Shen Ching Chu from Scum Villain. And so I was super excited to get this one. It's one of my favorites. All right. Now that I'm done nerding out over my figures, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thank you for chilling with me as I did that because I'm excited about that too. Anyway, we are going to go ahead and get started. with chapter 19, which is what you came for. All right. Chapter 19, he was by no means an impatient mushroom. Oh, so right before this, I'll do the summary real quick. Anzi decides, forget this, I'm going to go find my spore. So he actually is starting to kind of transform back into a mushroom with his hype, and is going to be going back through the mesh wires outside the window, and he's going to the center. Okay, so now we'll begin. A single snow-white hype reached out and gently rested on the surface of the wire mesh. Then it made its way inside through a tiny chink in the metal lattice. It was safe, at least at this point. There were no lethal weapons, only the barrier of the lattice. After the first hype went through the 3 layers of the lattice barrier to the other side, the remaining hype moved forward as well. They gathered together, and because they were so soft and flexible, they appeared to be almost liquid. The snow-white tide was pervasive as it penetrated the 3 layers of wire mesh, and then recombined behind them. A pipe leading forward appeared in Anji's perception. The pipe was smooth overall, but spots of rust were beginning to appear in some places. The smell of rust spread, resembling the smell of blood. Wind was blowing in from the end of the pipe. Anji proceeded forward. His hype stuck to the pipe walls like tentacles as he smoothly flowed ahead. This pipe was straight, and after turning at a right angle, it was still a straight path. He continued, and a 4-way intersection appeared up ahead. A horizontal and slightly wider pipe was connected to the pipe he was currently in. So many pipes. The wind got stronger, and the direction of the airflow was also very complex, indicating that this massive pipe system was like a winding maze. Anji briefly hesitated on the spot, then extended one long hype, leaving it in the pipe before he continued moving forward. Although Lu Feng thought he wasn't smart, Anji felt that he couldn't be considered stupid either. Decided to mark his path with this hype. That way, no matter where he went, he could make his way back via the same path by following this hype. That's pretty smart. After making this decision, Anji felt much more at ease. He went straight through the 4-way intersection, proceeding in the same direction as before. After another right-angle turn, there was a faint light up ahead. Anji came to the light source, another vent. The familiar news broadcaster's voice was playing. Predictably, he had come to the vent in someone else's house. Over the course of a month, the main city has recalled a total of 12,000 mercenaries from outside and formally entered a recovery period. In the extended 10-year recovery period, the main city's research power will be entirely invested in the investigation of the source of infections. ... Tap, tap, tap. There came the even sound of knocks on the door. Anji had entered by mistake in the first place. He didn't intend to pry into other human secrets, so he planned to leave. But then he temporarily gave up on the idea. There was the sound of a door opening. Colonel Lu. Oh, it's a female. Hang on. Colonel Lu! A female voice rang out, its tone very crisp. Colonel Lu. This was Lu Feng's room. Anji surreptitiously emerged from the vent and moved outward a bit so that he could hear more clearly, for he was indeed somewhat curious about Lu Feng's life. Then he heard a familiar cold voice. Hello. Hello, Colonel Lu. I'm a staff member of the Garden of Eden's 21st floor. The Garden of Eden. Anji pricked up his ears, or he would have, if his current form had such things. That's kind of cute. What do you want? Lu Feng asked. It's like this, the woman smiled. Firstly, congratulations on your return from the outer city, Colonel. Secondly, I'm asking on behalf of my superiors if you have any desire to if you have any desire to donate sperm to the Garden of Eden at present. Lu Feng's reply was very succinct and heartless. No. That is truly regrettable. If you are interested in the future, please contact us. Your genes are extremely outstanding, so if they cannot be put to effective use, it is a loss for the entire base. Thank you. Lu Feng's tone was not softened by her praise. He said, Is there anything else? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me turn off that ringer. That's my alert tone. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else? The flowers Madame Lu planted have bloomed, the woman said. She requested that I deliver you a bunch along the way. The main city's work is very busy, and the madam urges you to make sure to rest and take good care of yourself. After a short silence, Lu Feng said, Is she still in good health? Everything is normal. Thank you. Lu Feng's voice dropped somewhat. Give her my regards. Their conversation ended there, and after the door closed again, there was no other activity within the room. The weather forecast stated that the gales would continue and the temperature would drop. The sound suddenly stopped, presumably because Lu Feng turned off the TV. Then footsteps gradually approached as Lu Feng returned to the bedroom and then sat down at his desk. After a few sounds of sheets of paper being flipped, a silence descended upon the room, and there was only the sound of Lu Feng's breathing. Anji wanted very much to extend a few hype out from underneath the bed and see what the colonel was doing, but he didn't dare to. At last, he slowly went back the way he came through the vent. At the four-way intersection, he chose the direction that the wind was blowing from, and with the slender hype he used to mark his path in his wake, he continued forward. The wind, ice cold and smelling like blood, blew at his hype. The pipe walls were connected to other pipe mouths, and each pipe mouth was connected to other complex pipe structures. At the same time, there was yet another intersection up ahead. A path merely this short was enough to make Anji realize the complexity of the entire system. He didn't have a road map, only knowledge of the lighthouse's general direction, so he could imagine the difficulty of entering the lighthouse via the pipes. But he could keep searching, for he was by no means an impatient mushroom. There's our title. After several turns, Anji was completely unable to discern directions, nor did he have any way of being conscious of the passage of time. He only knew that when he was traveling in the direction the wind was blowing from, the pipe would get wider and the wind would get stronger as well. He guessed that this was because he had found the ventilation system's backbone. Sometimes he worried that his hype would break, but he could not reinforce it or leave another strand. To mushrooms, their hype were like blood to humans. Excessive blood loss would lead to death, so he couldn't use it all up. Sometimes there would be wire mesh or some sharp turbines that seemed capable of slicing up all flesh and joints up ahead. At these times, he would carefully slide past the cutting edges to avoid his hype getting severed. Anji didn't know how long he traveled for. Only the sound of the wind and the minute rustling of his hype moving over the rusted pipe walls accompanied him. In front of him was an infinitely long black pipe, and behind him was the same. This feeling made him return to the span of time when he lost his spoor, mindlessly wandering here and there in the abyss. Perhaps he'd find it tomorrow, perhaps he'd never be able to find it. When the pipe's diameter was as wide as the height of two men, Anji felt a blurry red glow light up ahead. He moved forward, carefully passing a large turbine, then unexpectedly fell out of the pipe mouth. Oops. Guess he didn't hang on. He landed on the hard and rough metal ground and was illuminated by the dim red light. He looked around. This place was no longer inside of a pipe, but rather an open and roomy cylindrical space. It was as big as the Garden of Eden's main hall, and both wind and the red light poured in from above. It was too high up, so Anji couldn't feel it. His snow-white mass elongated on the ground, and the hype gathered together to become a human body and skin. It was very cold, so the hype spread over his body, creating a closely woven, loose white robe that blocked the biting chill outside. I'm kind of wondering how that works, because you're technically making clothes out of yourself, which wouldn't you be able to feel? So, like, it kind of defeats the purpose other than, like, covering modesty. But again, I guess that's, like, sci-fi science things that I don't understand. I don't know. I feel like that's an odd detail. Anji stepped barefoot upon the metal floor, not helping with the coldness, and lifted his head to look upwards. A massive turbine was placed at a slant at the very top of the entire space, and it occupied his entire field of vision. A dim red curtain of laser light shone around the turbine, similar to the city walls of the outer city. He knew that this was one kind of the human's defense weapons. As soon as a creature attempted... Yeah, I agree. Why should he care about modesty? He's a mushroom. As soon as a creature attempts to pass by it by force, it would immediately trigger an alarm. Looking past the turbine's iron teeth, Anji saw the sky outside where the aurora was still shining bright. This place was connected to the outside world. He realized that this was the air inlet of the ventilation system, and after the turbine started up, the air from the outside world would continuously be taken in and then supplied to the pipes in all directions. He retracted his gaze and looked forward. In the center of this cylindrical space, there was a rectangular metal workbench. It may have been the console for the entire system. He walked over, but then he discovered this was not the case. Upon this metal platform, 3 small rectangular boxes were welded. Using the light, Anji could see that next to the boxes were molted writings that seemed to have been plated on. Anji leaned down slightly and wiped away the dust and rust to clearly see those cramped writings. It was a letter. To those who come after, I am Khan Jinlan, the person in charge of constructing the northern bases. Oh, actually, no. I need to give him a voice. To those who come after, I am Khan Jinlan, the person in charge of constructing the northern base's underground ventilation project. The ventilation system took over 1 year to design and 9 years to build. The construction cost of 110 million yen per kilometer. That's a lot. Opponents have suggested delaying the construction period due to the difficulty of the base's construction, the enormous amount of manpower and resources consumed. But through discussion, we believe that once the weakened geomagnetic field continues deteriorating, within 10 years, the human economy will inevitably collapse. Within 50 years, the surviving humans will inevitably lose the entirety of heavy industries, research and development, along with production capacity. The means of production and focus of scientific research are all biased towards the medical field. We no longer have time. Fortunately, the construction of both the underground ventilation system and the above-ground base have been completed without any issues this year, and my fellow humans can live under the strict protection of the base for now. This is the only thing I feel relieved about. Thanks to cosmic radiation, despite being under strict protection, still suffering from various cancers and autoimmune diseases. I have requested that the base inter my ashes in the ventilation system's core. That way, when each generation of engineers enters it for maintenance, I can know that the base is still safe, that the great species of humankind still exists. May you have a bright future. Best regards, June 2030. These were ashes. Spock's contained what was once a human body. was a tomb, and these writings left behind were messages this human left for later generations. And yes, I agree. Lore! Perhaps it was more appropriate to call it an epitaph. Anji looked to the right. On the right side was a box that was almost identical in shape and welded to the table surface at the bottom. There were plated words next to it as well, a letter with an identical tone. All right, should we do, let's see. To Mr. Kong Jinlan and those who come after, I am Liao Pingan, the person in charge of the Northern Base's underground ventilation system product maintenance. The ventilation system is serviced every half a year and undergoes overall maintenance every 2 years. At present, it is operating in perfect condition. As Mr. Kang expected, not only did the situation with the weakened geomagnetic field not improve, it completely disappeared in December of the year 2030 instead. Fortunately, the artificial magnetic pole project succeeded not long afterwards. The world once again came under the protection of a magnetic field. Humans no longer suffer from illnesses because of radiation exposure. Unfortunately, cosmic radiation gave rise to the infection and mutation of bacteria, fungi, and viruses, and humankind has met an unprecedented catastrophe. As one who has experienced this catastrophe, I've witnessed the shrinkage of the territory in which humans live, the collapse of the economic system, and the gradual loss of industrial capacity. The base has invested all of humankind's remaining production capacity into military production, the construction of military bases, and the expansion of the base, producing a steady stream of guns, ammunition, nuclear weapons, aircraft, armor, and tanks. I do not know where the purpose of this base lies, nor do I know if these actions have accelerated the depletion of humankind's resources. I can only hope that the base has a deeper purpose. In the midst of this catastrophe, I have unfortunately been infected with deadly bacteria. As my life is coming to a close, I still feel endless panic regarding the base's future, so I choose to be interred here with Mr. Kong. Not King Kong, Mr. Kang, and wait for the next generation of engineers to report that it is safe. May you have a bright future. Best regards, November 2052. Next was a third box of ashes and an epitaph. To Mr. Kong Jinlan, Mr. Liao Pingan, and those who come after. I am Yang Yi, the person in charge of the Northern Base's underground ventilation system product maintenance. The ventilation system is serviced every half a year and undergoes overall maintenance every 2 years. At present, it is operating in perfect condition. I must inform the two predecessors that in this era, the ventilation system is no longer one of the base's countless infrastructures, but rather has played a peerlessly brilliant role in protecting humankind's safety. In the year 2053, the start of global biological mutations, the human bases have committed themselves to the vast defensive war with the military as their primary forces and civilian mercenaries as auxiliary forces. With the deficiencies in resources and industrial construction capacity, the strong military bases and powerful military weapons left to us by the previous generation have played an unimaginable role, ensuring the safety of the remaining humans. And after being transformed, the ventilation system has become one of the defenses of the base's main city, protecting people from the invasion of insect monsters. At present, the northern base is still safe. The military and mercenary teams are continuously bringing back monster samples from the outer world and recovering scientific research equipment, cultural documents, and other needed materials from abandoned cities. The base's scientific research strength is centered on the research of infection theory and human reproduction. At present, no direction has been found for the former, whereas initial steps have been taken for the latter. A large number of new lives have come, and the human population has begun to rise. Although the environment is still hostile, I believe that everything will take a turn for the better. In the protection of the base, I die happily of geriatric illness. Oh, so he got old. Nice. May you have a bright future. Best regards, January 2104. Oh, it's next century. Nice. Anji carefully finished reading, then looked to the side. It was empty, with no more boxes. 2104 was already a very distant age. Perhaps the next generation of engineers would soon lie here too, with epitas telling stories of what occurred recently, such as the fall of the outer city or something else. Just then, great mournful sounds came from all around. The mighty night wind blew in from the air inlet, and Anji shivered. The strong wind was like an unstoppable flood current, rendering him almost unable to open his eyes. Put his elbow up to his eyes to resist the blowing of the gale and bowed his head slightly. At that very moment, he suddenly felt pain. In the wind, a length of snow-white hype fluttered up in his peripheral vision. The white shape flickered, then disappeared in an instant. Anji whipped around. Only a short length of the white hype he had previously left to mark his path dragged along on the ground, trembling in the wind. The fierce wind had broken his hype, and he didn't know where the wind had carried the broken portion off to. His pupils contracted sharply, and when he looked in the direction he had come from, 6 pitch-black holes were lined up, all identical to each other. 6 pitch-black holes were lined up, all identical to each other. Oh boy, we get to play Pick the Boxes. And that is the end of chapter 19. Alright, I'm going to take a little sip. And then we will start chapter 20. That was kind of interesting with the lore drops right there. Okay. Chapter 20. This bastard Lu Fang. I have a feeling we're about to eavesdrop on some conversations. Alright. In the dim red light, the 6 round and pitch-black holes looked at him as if they were the compound eyes of insects. Anji unconsciously took a step back and bumped into the metal table. In that instant, he lost his balance, and his hand landed on the epitaph with its engraved words that were uneven to the touch. For some reason, the ice-cold metal table that stood alone in this empty hall and held the ashes of the deceased made him feel safe instead. That is kind of odd. He let out a soft sigh, and then tentatively walked forward until he reached the row of holes. Climbed into each one of the 6 pipes in succession, but he still couldn't find the slightest trace of his hype. It was too thin and would have contracted after snapping, and lastly, after it was blown up by the wind, he didn't know what corner it could have gotten stuck in. It was also too dark in this place. Anji blankly looked around. In this cylindrical space, all sides, in front of him, behind him, to his left, and to his right, had 6 pipe mouths each for a total of 24 that led in different directions. This was the source of the entire city's ventilation system. He knew he had 2 choices. Hurry to find his way back to his living quarters before sunrise and then continue searching tomorrow evening, or simply just not go back. He could give up his human identity from this moment onwards, allowing the person named Anji to disappear from the city. As a mushroom, Anji could wander in the underground pipes for a long time, without regard to day or night. So long as he roamed long enough before he withered, he would be able to sneak into the lighthouse. The wind grew stronger, and he gently shivered. He knew that the decision he was about to make would affect his entire destiny thereafter. But even if he decided to go back, could he really do it? Anji didn't know. As he looked at the 6 holes in the direction he came from, he clenched his teeth and crawled into the middle right one. He was unsure whether this was the original path. Could only let fate decide. It already would have been more convenient to crawl into the hole in his hype form, but 3 of humankind's predecessors were here, and he did not wish for them to see a xenogenic come in. Thus, it wasn't until Unji had completely entered the pipe that he once again changed into a ball of hype. That's kind of sweet. He was like, alright, your entire legacy and existence and hope was basically that humankind would thrive. It's kind of disrespectful for me to become a mushroom in front of you. I'll wait till it's dark. It's kind of sweet of him. The hype sped up, moving along the direction of the wind, and the wind was also pushing him from behind. Unji made a few turns and passed many intersections. Now he only wanted to wander to a pipe mouth that was connected to a human room as quickly as possible. He is such a polite mushroom. It would be even better if the room had a window, because he could sneak out of the window, find the nearest shuttle stop under the cover of night, and surreptitiously stick to the bottom of the shuttle. The nighttime shuttle would take him to the final stop near Building 24, and then he could slip back to his own corridor. So long as the night was dark enough, nobody would discover him. Someone's going to discover him. He traveled in this haphazard manner for a long time. When the pipe became narrower and narrower, a dim light finally appeared in front of him. He had arrived at a pipe mouth. This was a ventilation pipe located on the ceiling. G looked down from the pipe mouth. What appeared in the center of his field of vision was a transparent cylindrical container containing a slightly cloudy liquid, and inside the liquid, a flesh-colored object was floating. It was very small, about the size of 2 human fists. One end of a transparent tube was connected to this flesh-colored thing, and the other end was connected to a complicated-looking device. Did he find the literal baby-making part of the factory, like where they're growing the babies? A peculiar feeling arose in this device. G couldn't describe exactly what he was feeling. He only knew that the container held a living thing. Suddenly, he was stunned. He knew. This was a youngling. I was right. No, it was an embryo. The embryo of a human youngling. Further to the side, there was an identical device. Not only that, the entire spacious room was densely packed with such things. His field of vision was limited, so he couldn't tell exactly how big of a room it was. But he knew that the base could produce 5,000 to 10,000 younglings per year. That's still crazy to me. Sorry, I had someone who was asking a question. This was no other place. To his surprise, he had accidentally come to the Garden of Eden. Like, he's a very lucky mushroom, too. Like, Unji let out a sigh of relief. The Garden of Eden was a place he was familiar with, but at the same time, he felt even more troubled, for he knew how much humans cherish their younglings. Practically all areas in the Garden of Eden were covered by video cameras, as well as constantly guarded by staff. No one could harm the younglings. Good. Nobody should harm younglings. But at this thought, he became angry again. The world of mushrooms had video cameras. How could his younglings have been dug out by Lu Feng? Oh, if the world of mushrooms had video cameras, how could his youngling have been dug out by Lu Feng? But merely 3 seconds later, he discovered the mistake in his logic. Even if there were video cameras, they would not be able to stop Lu Feng from digging out his spore. The crux of this matter rested not in the video cameras, but rather the existence of this bastard Lu Feng. Wrong. The crux of the matter was how he was to get out now. It's kind of funny that he's indignant that mushrooms don't have cameras. All right. Chapter 21. Actually, I'm going to take a sip quick. Of all things to curse, the fact that there's no cameras. To curse Lu Feng right now, not the situation. That's funny. Chapter 21. then you don't know the Rose Manifesto either. Beep, beep, beep. The instrument's monotonous sound came from somewhere. But there was another kind of sound throughout the entire room as well. Ba-thump, ba-thump, ba-thump. Sound was extremely similar to a human heartbeat, but it wasn't real, because it permeated the entire room. It seemed like there was sound playing devices in the four corners of the, oh, maybe they're mimicking a mom, like the mom's heartbeat. That's interesting. Right at that moment, footsteps came from the end of the room. It was two humans who were conversing as they walked, seeming to be taking notes on something. After a while, the sounds of a simple conversation drifted over. Area 4 is normal. Area 6 is normal. Number 113's development has stopped. Continue observing. Number 334's cell growth is abnormal. It must be destroyed. Number 334 was transplanted too early. There was no choice. The last report wasn't approved. The higher-ups are determined to counter the high abnormality rate with a high birth rate. The abnormality rate of the embryos has been constantly increasing in the past 2 years. This isn't a wise decision at all. Only by staying in the mother's body for at least another month can the embryo's smooth development be ensured. Wait. So they actually have mothers? This isn't completely, like, that's... There's some aspects of that I have feelings about. The mother's flowering periods are too short. If that time is too prolonged, the birth rate will be insignificant. Why is it this difficult? Look on the bright side. The overall number of children is increasing. The footsteps drew away, and all that remained were the heartbeats that still pervaded the room. The light in the room was dim and soft. It was a safe nest, or a massive hollow organ. That powerful heartbeat was like a form of proof of the existence of life. Anji slowly backed out of the pipe. He felt a bit of discomfort in his own body. In this place, there seemed to be some strange waves affecting his body. But fortunately, after seeing the arrangement of the human rooms, he finally regained his sense of spatial orientation. He had to go toward the outside of the building. After circling in the pipes many more times, he found many vents, and these vents all led to one small square room after another. It seemed that it was still the time for people to be sleeping, for one person slept in each room. He had no way of getting out from under the beds to see, but he could hear weak breathing sounds, the breathing sounds of younglings. The windows were sealed shut, and the red light of video cameras shone high up in the room. He had no way of getting out of this kind of room. It wasn't until after another very long time that Anji successfully found a vent placed in a corridor ceiling at last. He carefully emerged, and his body spread out on the ceiling before he moved through the corridor along the ceiling. The cameras were angled downward so that they couldn't capture the visuals of the ceiling. Every floor in the Garden of Eden had a similar layout. He recognized that this ought to be a corridor used for taking care of chores, for the storehouses that held indoor cleaning tools, household goods, foodstuff, and junk were here. He became slightly excited. Based on this pattern, at 3/4 of the way down the corridor, there would be a door leading to a mid-sized balcony. Occasionally, it would be used for drying things, and staff members would sometimes smoke there. Very soon, Anji found the door. Striving to stretch out his hype, he flowed in through the cracks of the door. The sky was bright outside. Unexpectedly, it was already daytime. But before Anji had time to think carefully, his attention was completely diverted. On the spacious balcony, a very small white figure stood upon the concrete railing. It was a girl in a white dress. She had her back turned towards Anji as she faced the outside. She was slowly spreading her arms and her body leaned forward. She was about to fall. His human form materialized, and he took a few steps forward, grabbed the girl's shoulder, carried her down from the railing, and put her on the floor. The girl turned around. Anji was stunned. He had seen her before, just 2 days ago. She had run from the Garden of Eden to the road outside, been stopped by Lu Feng, and finally taken away by the staff members of the Garden of Eden. He wouldn't mistake her for anyone else. She looked at Anji. Man, sorry. She looked at Anji. It was a look almost devoid of spirit, without the brightness of the children in Anji's class. For a moment, Anji felt that this girl was a lifeless doll. He knew that his current appearance was not ordinary, draped in a robe woven from hype. Perhaps he looked like a human who had come outside draped in a bedsheet. But normal humans wouldn't come outside draped in a bedsheet. But the girl acted like she hadn't seen anything at all. She seemed to not think that there was anything peculiar about Anji's attire or that there was anything abrupt about Anji's appearance. She also seemed to not recognize him. Perhaps she didn't remember his existence at all. 3 seconds later, she once again slowly turned to look forward. It was currently early morning. The aurora had just disappeared, and thick white mist overflowed within the dark gray city, surging towards the gray-blue skies like rolling waves. From this angle, half of one's field of vision was blocked by the nearby cylindrical magnetic field generator. Bigger and taller than all other buildings, it was like a mountain, an island in the sea of mist, or a spiral staircase connecting the sky and the earth. The street lights and the dawn stars flickered together, but in front of such a massive form, they were eclipsed. The girl lifted her head and looked at the limitless sky above. I don't want to jump. Her voice was very young, but her words were very clear. I want to fly. Anji said, You'll fall. She said, I know. Her tone of voice was calm, not befitting a child of her age. The morning wind blew, lifting her white dress and black hair. That was an unusual delicacy. Yeah, that was an unusual delicacy and softness. The women and children outside didn't have this kind of thing. Jusei had this quality as well, but it was even more obvious in this girl. Anji stood behind her. He had just protected a human youngling, and at the same time he had paid a price. At least, his existence had been exposed to this girl's eyes. Now he stood in the midst of extreme danger, unable to reveal any weakness. He said, Why are you here? Sometimes the surveillance will be messed up for a while. They haven't discovered it yet, the girl said. I come out to look at the sky. You can look at the sky during free activity time, too, Anji said. What floor in class are you in? He earnestly carried out the responsibility of a teacher. Couldn't allow a youngling to stay in such a dangerous place. She said, I'm in the Garden of Eden. Which floor and which class of the Garden of Eden are you in? I'm not in any floor or class, she said. Only boys are there. Anji patiently explained. The classes have girls too. There were many girls in his class alone, such as Jisha, although their appearances were about the same as the boys, not wearing dresses or letting their hair grow to shoulder length like the girl in front of him. Those girls aren't girls. She turned her head to look at him. Only the ones on the 12th floor and above are real girls. How come? He asked. You don't even know that? She said. I don't know, Anji said. It was the truth. He indeed knew very little about this human base. An expression other than indifference appeared on the girl's face for the first time. The corners of her lips lifted, carrying a faint pride. You don't know the Rose Manifesto either. Why do I have a bad feeling that this is a very sexist thing that has to do with the reproduction thing that I said I had feelings on? And I'm about to not like where this goes. Oh boy. What is it? He asked. The girl turned around and draped herself on the railing. The sun rose faintly in the sky. Then you wouldn't also be unaware of bacterial infection, right? She asked. I know about it, Anji said. He did indeed know about the calamity that led to the death of 90% of this planet's humans once upon a time. Only people with outstanding genes could survive, she said. Mm-hmm, Anji said. Against strong mutated bacteria, human treatment methods had no effect, so they could only escape infection by relying on innate immunity. The human's genes destined him to resist this disease, he would be able to survive. Then, after all those people survived, they discovered that very few live children were being born in the world. She reached up to comb her hair and paused for a while, as if she was sorting out her words. Only then did she say, after being infected, the surviving girls all had defects in their ability to give birth. Only a very few of them had relatively small defects that would allow them to safely do so. Anji didn't say anything. She wrinkled her nose and continued. Scientists would give them genetic examinations. The rubrics said that if they had beneath 60 points, they lost the ability to do so entirely. Above 60 points, there was a chance they could have normal children. Then there was the Rose Manifesto. You're a boy, so the manifesto has nothing to do with you. Anji asked, what is the Rose Manifesto? We just memorized it, she said. Would you like to hear it? Okay, Anji said. In a calm voice, she recited. The 23,371 women of the 4 human bases with a fertility score of 60 and above passed the following manifesto with 0 rejection votes. I'm willing to devote myself to the destiny of humankind, accepting genetic experiments in all form of assisted reproduction, to strive for an entire lifetime for the continuation of the human race. That's how it is, she said. That's why I'm on the 12th floor and you guys are below. Now you know. They made breeding farms. I mean, I wish I could say I was surprised in a post-apocalyptic world with infection and mutation. I'm disappointed, not surprised. Yeah. Thank you, he said. But you still need to take care to not come to such a dangerous place. I won't jump down, she said. I come every week. Haven't you come as well? She looked at Anji again and repeated, I want to look at the sky, so I come here. Why are you here? I can't find my way back, Anji said. I know the way, she said. I have a secret passage. He thought for a while. I also don't have clothes to wear. I also know where the laundry room is, she said. Anji asked her, Can you tell me where it is? But she didn't give a direct reply. Instead, she asked, Are you a student from the lower floors? I'm a teacher, Anji said. Promise me one thing. Her eyes seemed to gain a bit of spirit as she said to Anji, Promise me one thing, and I'll go find clothes for you, then take you outside through the secret passage. Anji asked, What thing? Find a boy on the 6th floor called Sinan and tell him that I've been injected with a tracking agent, so I can't go out to play with him anymore, she said. At this time next week, come back here and tell me what he said. He was silent. The girl looked at him and asked, Are you unable to do that? Anji met her eyes. She blinked, and at this time did she seem like and only at this time did she seem like a normal child. In the end, he said, I may not be able to. She said, You could find him. He's just on the 6th floor. Anji didn't say anything. But she seemed to become a bit anxious. As she pulled open the balcony door, she said, I'll go find some clothes for you. Before Anji could stop her, her white dress disappeared behind the door. If the Sinan she spoke of was the Sinan who Anji knew, then he was already no longer in the Garden of Eden, but rather the lighthouse. But he didn't know how she would react if he really told her this information. He knew that human emotions would bring her pain. So even after the girl left and came back, pulled him along through the quiet and deserted empty corridor, and finally stopped at a half-open small door in a pile of odds and ends, he still hadn't figured out how to respond. If you can get in, you can go down to the first floor. She pointed to the door. That door was half open. Strictly speaking, because it had been long neglected, it was no longer perfectly shut, but rather loosened. But the rusty door bolt still hung on one side of the door, one side of it embedded in the wall, making it so that the door could only open far enough to allow a child to slip through sideways. Anyway, Anji said, "I'll try." He walked up to the door and leaned over slightly. It was impossible for an adult human to pass through here, but he was still a mushroom, after all. Under the cover of his clothing, his body briefly changed into a hype. After losing the limitations of a human skeleton, he very easily got through the door. "Your body is so soft," the girl said. "I have something as well," Anji said. "Could you not tell others that I came here today?" The girl said, "If you come here again next week." Her voice was cut off. "Lily?" a female voice sounded. "You came here again?" The voice carried an undertone of reproach. Anji dodged to the side, and he heard Lily say, "I'm sorry, madam. This time it was I who found you." The voice referred to as madam was gentle. "If it was them, you'd be locked up again." Lily said, "I won't do it again." Following that conversation was the sound of footsteps as they seemed to walk away. G looked in that direction through the crack and saw that a madam in a long white dress was holding Lily's hands as their figures gradually receded in the dimly lit corridor. Lily hadn't finished speaking, but he knew what she wanted to say. He seemed to have reached an agreement with Lily. Next week, he had to come here again and tell her Sinan's reply. Preoccupied, he looked around. It was dark all around, and the aroma of dampness wafted toward him. He dimly saw that the walls were molted and flaking and covered with grayish-green spots of mold. That the ground was covered with fallen light-gray powdery debris. This was a narrow and steep staircase. Furthermore, it was obvious that it hadn't been used in who knows how many years. Anji found the stair handrail and walked down along it bit by bit. There were no windows, and it was even darker than the night. This place wasn't much better than the pipes. Every floor had 20 steps. As Anji walked, he counted the floors. When he got to the 6th floor, there was a gap in the staircase's small door approximately the same size as the one on the 20th floor. He exited from there and reached the 6th floor's utility room. The bright light shone upon him. The clothes Lily gave him were the standard uniform of the Garden of Eden's staff members, a snow-white shirt, no different from his previous dress. He walked out and took a look at the time on the wall clock in the corridor. It was 7 o'clock. If he went to work at the training base from the Garden of Eden, he was already late. Thus, Anji went downstairs, speeding up as he walked towards the doorway. The bright red, "Humankind's interests take precedence over all else" slogan was particularly eye-catching on the snow-white wall. The staff clad in white uniforms walked about on the bright ground. Children's voices traveled over from afar. Everything was different from the interior of the quiet and circuitous pipes. He felt that he had been reborn. The main hall's glass door opened, and he ran headfirst into someone. Anji felt at a loss for words. 3 guesses for who it is. 3, 2, 1. Lu Fang. Behind and slightly to the side of Lu Feng was Sarong. He saw Lu Feng's eyes narrow, and from this movement he felt an aura of danger. As expected, Lu Feng said grimly, "Why are you here?" Facing this person, Anji's Haipe were on the verge of standing on end. He shouldn't be in the Garden of Eden right now. He should be at the training base with Colin. He lifted his head to look at Lu Feng. Those ice-cold green eyes observed him, seemingly saying, "You can start telling your tall tales now." Anji said, "I went the wrong way." He really did go the wrong way, having gotten utterly lost under the entire city. If he hadn't come to the Garden of Eden by coincidence, or if he hadn't found that balcony in time, maybe he may have continued to be trapped in that place, then lose his identity as a human and never again be able to come out. And this bastard Lu Feng would have never had anything to do with him from then on. He slightly dropped his gaze. For some reason, he unexpectedly felt that the current colonel wasn't as hateful as before. Then he heard Sarang gently say, "You're supposed to go to the training base for work today. Did you not realize that the location had changed?" Anji said nothing. The sun rose from behind the distant artificial magnetic pole, and its golden light shone on the silver buttons of Lu Feng's uniform. His voice was a bit hoarse. "Moreover, you'll be late." Lu Feng didn't say anything, but he also didn't deliberately make things difficult for Anji. He felt that, based on Lu Feng's understanding of his IQ, Sarang's reason was sufficiently convincing. He moved to one side, trying to bypass Lu Feng and leave. Suddenly, Lu Feng's voice came over from next to him. "I'll take you there." Lu Feng drove very steadily and quickly, his speed at least twice that of the shuttle. When he stopped at the entrance to the training base, the display inside the car showed that the time was just 7:25 a.m., 5 minutes before it was time to go to work. He wasn't late. Such a gentleman, making sure his boo got to work on time. It was just that when he got out of Lu Feng's car, Anji felt that those other people who had also come to the training base for work all cast a look at him. In any case, it wasn't his first time being looked at. Anji came to the card-reading turnstile at the entrance. People came over, one after another, swiping their cards to open the turnstile and walked in. Anji froze. He realized something. Footsteps came from behind him. He turned and saw Lu Feng standing very close behind, looking at him with eyebrows raised. "I forgot my card too," Anji said. He heard Lu Feng softly click his tongue. Two slender fingers clasped the blue ID card and put it up to the sensor. With a beep, the turnstile opened. Lu Feng used his own ID card to open the gate for him. At the same time, the colonel's voice, tinged with a faint disdain, sounded in his ear. "So stupid." All right, that's the end of chapter 21. Oh, goodness. All right, I'm going to take another step. We're going through this pretty quickly. Let me see how big chapter... We might do some more chapters. Heck, it's Friday. We might even finish the book tonight if people want to. Because the end of the book is only... Okay, it's a bit. It's a bit. We'll see. We'll see where we get to tonight. There is lots of world building this chapter. All right. One more step. All right. Chapter 22. Come with me to the lighthouse. Oh, so stupid. Even a mushroom like him knew that these were not good words. But Anji had no way to refute them. He walked through that door, and the doorman at the sentry box observed the proceedings, looking angry, but afraid to speak up. He understood them. This position of arbiter, although it was not the greatest military rank, had the highest authority when it came to killing people. Nobody was willing to cross Lu Feng. Anji himself wasn't, either. He said, "Thank you, Colonel." "No problem," Lu Feng said. "In the afternoon, request time off." Huh? Lu Feng seemed to nonchalantly lift his eyebrows as he said, "Come with me to the lighthouse." That was fast. We usually don't get the title drop that quickly. All right. "What for?" Anji asked. "Dr. G wants you for something," Lu Feng said. G was a little suspicious of the sentence authenticity. Why would the doctor want him? For a moment, he suspected that this was Lu Feng's excuse to arrest him, bring him to the lighthouse. But he felt that his own performance this morning was flawless. Even Sarang took the initiative to speak for him. Then he suddenly realized that in Sarang's eye as well, he didn't seem very smart. Poor mushroom. But even if he wasn't a smart human, he was a rational mushroom, and going to the lighthouse was actually what he desired. He said, "Okay." Lu Feng gave him a vague hum in reply, then turned and left. Okay. While the children were being trained by the drill master, Anji sat on a bench nearby. When the instructor needed assistance, such as for scoring and timing and such, he would be called over. There was nothing else to do, nor were there any reading materials in the office he was interested in, so he could only take an introductory manual on the operation of various weapons. Colin didn't sit with him, but rather on another bench nearby. He had made a new friend, the language and literature teacher of the class next door, a boy around 20 years old. The book page he was reading had described in detail a large fighter plane, the model name PL-1109, the masterpiece of human science and technology from the period when the magnetic field was in disorder. It was a top-tier exterior that shielded against radiation, top-tier engine and motors, and an independent crew system that was unmatched throughout the entire base, capable of accurately determining its course in the absence of a magnetic field. It sounded very amazing, but Anji really had no interest in it whatsoever, and because he hadn't slept all night, he even began to doze off slightly. To his right, Colin and the language teacher's greetings to each other had ended. They exchanged names and then began to converse, and the wind blew the contents of their conversation to Anji's ear. "Do you like Main City?" Colin asked. Anji was astutely aware that Colin was about to start preaching again. "Why wouldn't I like it?" the boy said. "The main city gives us stable lives." He seemed to also be a talkative person. Just as he finished that sentence, continued with the next. "It must have been a month since we came to the main city. How do you feel?" "Liking it is out of the question," Colin said. "How come?" the boy said. "You don't need to be a mercenary and go out to throw your life away, something that we previously wouldn't have even dared to think about. Every day I thank my mother for forcing me to finish 3 educational courses, although she mainly wanted me to finish studying language and economics to test into the supply depot in the future, so I wouldn't need to make a living out in the wilderness." Colin was silent for a while before asking, "What about your mother?" "Dead in the wilderness," he said. "The two of them hadn't raised me for many years before my father failed to return, and then she failed to return as well." "My apologies," Colin said. "It's fine," the boy smiled. "I'm used to it. What about you?" "My mother was killed by the arbiter, and my father. When we went to the main city, he was left behind in District 6. My apologies, the boy said as well. But the exchange of their experiences seemed to swiftly bring the two of them closer together. After a short silence, the boy looked at the children on the training ground, put his arm behind his head, and sighed. Having been in the outer city for a long time, I've forgotten that we came from the main city, too, when we were little. It's kind of an interesting connection I didn't make. They all came from the main city and then transfer out, mostly. I remember quite clearly, Colin said. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I wanted to be a biologist, and my grades were good as well. Yet I still wasn't able to remain in the main city. When I was young, I wanted to be a military officer, the boy said. In the end, I fell during the final assessment, and the military didn't want me. Colin said, Fate is fickle. Look on the bright side. Our intelligence was insufficient, so even if we remained, it would be painful for us, the boy said with a sigh. One might not be able to be happy even if they remain in the main city. I heard that someone wanted to sort and study humankind's archives, but because of his outstanding talent in mathematics, he could only stay in the lighthouse for his entire life and calculate ballistics trajectories. Think about it. You wanted to be a biologist, but the base thought you were more suited to be a linguist and made you translate documents. How painful would that be? If it were me, I would suddenly die. This is the reason why I don't like the base, Colin said. It's a cold-blooded and ruthless machine. You have to think of yourself as a little part, a cog in the greater wheel. Your genes are your model number, determining what sector you work in. Colin gave a rare smile. You're very amusing, the boy said. Those of us who study language are rather good at coming up with analogies. But people aren't parts. Under the banner of doing everything for the sake of serving humankind's interests, the base has been constantly losing its human characteristics instead. What alternative is there? We can't just mooch off the base. We have to produce some value. The boy stood up and looked at the children before them. I truly like children, he said with a sudden and very happy smile. Smile, not smiling. I really like this job. Maybe someday, among the children I teach, there will be an unmatched genius who can save the whole world. And he spoke to himself. In that case, I should prepare lessons in earnest. With chin resting in his hand, Unchi looked at him curiously before looking at Colin again. Colin didn't say anything else. Unchi thought that this time he wasn't able to succeed in finding a comrade. When they were in the outer city, Colin had held up a poster that read, Oppose the Arbiter. If they were in the main city, what would he hold up? Felt that it may be something like, Oppose human classification, or We want freedom. His train of thought became more chaotic as he got sleepier. Trying to focus on the military's illustrated handbook, he cursorily flipped through the fighter plane section, then looked at the weapons section. Conventional bombs, nuclear bombs, and hydrogen bombs of various equivalents could easily blow a mushroom to bits. But he was by no means afraid. Humans were unlike the things inside the abyss. They were a rule-abiding existence, so as long as he complied with the rules, he would be able to live. He spent the morning in this manner. At noon, the children finished training. A few of the younglings had received bumps, and some of the other younglings thought that the training was too difficult. They didn't go to eat, instead surrounding him at the bench and whimpering. As Anji gently stuck a bandage on a youngling, he comforted a short-haired girl next to him who thought that training was too difficult. Hang in there. After you pass the training, you can be an officer. The girl said, I can't just be eliminated? No, you can't, he said. He thought that even if she couldn't stay in the main city, she ought to train hard. Otherwise, once they grew up, the outer city resumed operations by then. Nobody would adopt children with poor physical fitness. No mercenary team would want them. They wouldn't be able to pass the test and get into the civilian posts of the city affairs office or the supply depot. They'd only be able to go to the third underground floor. regardless of their gender. Having stayed there for a month, he knew that the people there did not live well. Thus, he said, you all have to train hard. The girl hugged his arm and said, but even after becoming officers, we need to train every day. Anji patted her hair and thought for a while. But they have good-looking uniforms. A boy looked at the soldiers at the training ground and said, they're super ugly. Their military ranks aren't high enough, Anji said sincerely to him. The uniforms get better once you reach colonel or so. Really? A youngling asked. Will it be as good looking as the one that person wears? Another youngling asked. Which person? Anji asked. The youngling pointed behind him. Anji turned around. Against a utility pole 2 or 3 meters behind him, and to one side leaned a certain colonel clad in a black uniform. At such a close distance, the younglings were unexpectedly unafraid of him. Perhaps it was because this colonel was currently looking straight at Anji, his slightly lifted eyebrow carrying a hint of joy. Anji was at a loss for words. What he said just now had probably been overheard. Ooh, he heard him say his uniform was handsome. He liked it. His eyebrows of joy. The woo. Sorry, I've been kind of like clearing my throat a lot. All right. In Lu Feng's car, Anji had fallen asleep. The moment he woke up was when he instinctively sensed danger. As soon as he opened his eyes, he discovered that the car had stopped at the entrance to the lighthouse, and the colonel had opened the car door on his side and was examining him from above. Did you not sleep last night? The colonel's voice was cold enough to turn water to ice. Anji's brain was still in a non-functioning state. He rubbed his eyes to wake himself up and then got out of the car. But because he was sleepy to the point of toppling over, his unsteady footing made him pitch forward into Lu Feng. A pair of powerful arms held him steady, and Anji finally stood firm. He didn't fall, but he did become quite a lot more awake. The lighthouse was quiet and bustling with activity as always. When they were walking through the corridor on the first floor, 4 soldiers carrying 2 bodies covered in white cloth passed by. Sarang was by their side, his face slightly pale. Upon seeing Lu Feng, he explained succinctly, experimental malfunction. They were exposed. Lu Feng gave a slight nod, then took Anji to the elevator to go up to the 10th floor. Anji was standing in the middle of the corridor on the 10th floor. Dr. G was standing in the middle of the corridor on the 10th floor. You're here, Lu Feng said. What's the matter? I'm gonna borrow your little cutie here for something. To Anji, the doctor said, come with me. Anji didn't think he'd become Lu Feng's property, but he still followed. The doctor took him to the familiar laboratory where Sinan had been locked up. Through the transparent, airtight glass wall, he spotted Sinan. But it also wasn't Sinan. He walked up to the glass wall. Inside was a black insect. It was bigger than Sinan's original form and about half the size of an adult. There were 2 black compound eyes on top of his head, glowing with a dark silver luster beneath the lamplight. Between the 2 compound eyes, on top of its head, a pair of thin, long antennae extended. Long, translucent wings hung from its back. Its abdomen was slender and long and covered with some dark gray fuzz, and the same fuzz also covered its mouth parts. It looked like a bee. Right now, it was wildly flying around and crashing into the transparent cage. its body continuously ramming into the glass wall as though it wanted to escape, but its torso and limbs were trembling nonstop, as if it was suffering extreme pain. The situation is abnormal. There are great discrepancies between its brainwaves and previous records in the database. I suspect that it still retains a portion of human consciousness and that it's resisting the xenogenic instincts, the doctor said. But none of us have any way of effectively communicating with it, so we want to invite you here to try. Zuanji stood in front of the communicator once again. Sinan, he said. Sinan's wing covers opened and closed, making rustling sounds as they rubbed together. He seemed to not hear anything, still flying wildly in the whole space as before. But Anji was convinced that there was a moment in which that head with its compound eyes had looked in his direction. Sinan, he said, do you remember Lily? The rustling sound stopped for a moment, but then the gray bee rammed the glass wall even more fiercely. As he watched Sinan, he said softly, do you have something you want to say to her? Sinan's wings trembled madly, but he had already lost his human vocal organs, so all he presented to the doctor were irregular peaks and troughs on the EEG. Dr. G said, there are changes in the electronic waves. He understands you. Who is Lily? Anji's gaze was slightly blank. The conversation between himself and Lily was a secret nobody knew about, but now there was no other option. An hour later, someone gently tapped on the laboratory door. Anji turned around. The first thing that caught his eye was a snow-white skirt. Madame Lu? There was a note of slight surprise in Dr. G's voice. Why are you here? Anji lifted his head. The woman who entered was a lady with an elegant, gentle bearing. She had long black hair that was loosely twisted into a bun at the back of her head and was wearing a light blue mask, so Anji could only see a pair of kind black eyes. Her body was slightly plump, which served to make her disposition even more kindly. The girl whose hand she was holding in her own right hand was none other than Lily, and on each side of them was a Garden of Eden staff member. In the last 3 months, the Garden of Eden's aberration rate has risen. I must personally deliver my report to the lighthouse and request them to decide again, she said. I just happened to receive an application from the lighthouse requesting Lily's assistance with a certain task, so I brought her here along the way. Dr. G said, sorry to trouble you. This outing is an exception. Madame Lu handed Lily over to Dr. G. Please treat her well. Please rest assured. After completing the handover, Madame Lu slowly turned her head. Lu Feng was in one corner of the room, eyes tracking her since she entered the lab. You're here too? She said. Lu Feng dropped his gaze slightly and said, Mother? Oh, hello, Mother. Mic drop? It appears to be very important research. Madame Lu looked at him. I should have picked up on that because the last name was Lu. Okay. When Anji witnessed this... Okay. At that moment, one of them was at the room entrance, while the other was at the corner of the room, diagonally opposite, their gazes meeting. Madame Lu's expression was soft, while Lu Feng's gaze was calm. When Anji witnessed this, a type of intuition told him that there was some unknown undercurrent surging in their eye contact, but he couldn't understand it. Approximately 10 seconds later, the drama, yes. So much tea is going on, and there's a sad, unlucky little mushroom stuck in the middle of the concentrated eye gaze. Approximately undercurrent surging in their eye contact, but he couldn't understand it. Approximately 10 seconds later, Madame Lu said, I should go. One of the two staff members helped her turn around, and the two of them protected her completely. The footsteps receded, and Dr. G closed the door. This is the 35th year Madame Lou has worked for the Garden of Eden. His gaze seemed careworn. She truly is a great woman. Why don't you talk to her a little more? Lu Feng looked at the tightly shut silver door. We haven't met in a long time. A very long time. Then all the more reason to talk with her some more. Could it be that your work these years at the trial court has already made you cold-blooded and indifferent to this point? Dr. G said. Remember when I was younger, I even helped you mess up the surveillance on the 20th floor, allowing you to often run out to see her? The candy Madame gave me was very tasty. Dr. G, Lu Feng said. There's no harm in speaking less. Dr. G shrugged. 3 seconds later, he said, suddenly, I really did a flawless job back then. Tell me, after all these years, has the surveillance been fixed? Lu Feng looked at Lily, then looked at Anji, who was looking at Lily, and said, Looks like it hasn't. Lily had already pressed herself against the glass wall. She looked at the bee-shaped xenogenic behind the glass, and an unprecedented delight at seeing something new appeared in her soulless eyes. Is this a bee? The gray bee lay prone against the glass wall, locking eyes with her. Its movements finally stopped for a brief spell, but then it fell into painful convulsions again. It looks like it's in a lot of pain. Lily looked at Anji, obviously recognizing him, and asked, Was it you who wanted me to come over and look at the bee? He murmured, That's Sinan. Lily was stunned. Just as Anji thought she was about to show a sorrowful expression, she broke out into a sudden smile instead. Sinan, she said to the gray bee through the glass wall, you can fly now. There was neither fear nor unfamiliarity in her eye. She had never seen monsters kill people, nor had she ever been warned to stay away from xenogenics. In the eyes of children, there weren't many differences between bees and humans. I mean, there's something beautiful about that, let's be real. Like, you gotta admit. She wasn't even surprised by the fact that Sinan had suddenly turned into a bee. Probably because, in the eyes of younglings, the world was just that full of unpredictable changes. It's jumbled again. The doctor looked at the instrument. But for 3 seconds just now. Its electrical waves were very close to that of humans. Dr. G patted Lily's shoulder. Lily, come help us with something. What thing? Lily asked. Sinan's consciousness is fighting against the bee's consciousness. Perhaps you can help him wake up. Can you keep talking to him? I can, Lily said. Can you change me into a bee too? If you also changed into a bee, the Garden of Eden would execute me, Dr. G said. If you can communicate with him, it would be even better. We have to know how exactly he is infected. The source of infection is in the Garden of Eden, but it has not been found so far. Only by finding it quickly only by finding it as quickly as possible can we ensure the main city's safety. Okay. Lily put her hand on the glass wall. Then can you give me a reward? Dr. G said warmly, What would you like? I don't want to stay on the 20th floor. Lily pressed her cheek to the glass. Can you rescue me from there? My apologies, Dr. G said. This exceeds the scope of my capabilities. It's okay. I guessed as much. Lily once again looked at the gray bee. I'll try my best. She truly did try her best for an entire afternoon, but Sinan's condition swung between good and bad. There were only a few times in which he gave normal feedback, but according to Dr. G, his situation was much improved from before, and so he decided to invite Lily again the next day. The doctor was busy with other research duties, and Lily didn't like interacting with others. So in the following few days, Anji also had to accompany Lily at the lighthouse and communicate with Sinan. By 7 p.m., Lily had exhausted her young strength and energy. She was delivered back to the Garden of Eden, and Anji could also get off work. At noon, he had fallen asleep in the car and received Lu Feng's ire. Having learned his lesson, he stayed awake the entire trip, got out of the car awake, and took the same elevator with Lu Feng up to the 37th floor while awake. Similarly, he faced his own room door while awake. The tightly shut room door. He forgot his key inside. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Lu Feng's voice, carrying undertone of a smile, rang out behind him. How come you aren't going inside? Ji took a deep breath. Rashly making his way into the pipes last night was one of the two biggest mistake-driven decisions he had made in his life. The other one was deciding to go roll around in the windy wilderness on the night of February 14th. He was deeply regretful. Of course, the colonel understood the drama Anji was facing. He said, the main city's city affair office can reissue ID cards for the next 3 days. Find some place to live. With those words, he unhurriedly opened his own room door, walked in, and made to close the door. On the other side, Anji turned around to look at him, brows slightly furrowed and gently biting his lower lip, the very image of someone struggling. He seemed to be pondering something. But Lu Feng said nothing, only looking at him flatly. Time passed quietly. Unexpectedly, Anji turned around and pressed the elevator's down button. Then I'll go find Sarang. What a cheeky little boy. That's really funny. Lu Feng was like, come on, ask me. He's like, screw you. I'm gonna go find your second in command. Okay, that's the end of chapter 22. We're gonna continue. I just need to blow my nose. I'm starting to get a little stuffy. Sorry. Okay. I know it said, yeah, they're really funny. I know it said only up to 22, but we're gonna just keep going. It's only an hour and a half, and usually I go for like 2 or 2.5 hours. So. Who knows? We might even finish the book tonight. If not tonight, we'll finish on Tuesday. Okay. Chapter 23. Is it because you cannot waver? Always with the interesting chapter titles. The colonel's living quarters seemed like quarters nobody lived in. He folded first. It was just like his nap room in the Outer City's City Defense Agency. That's such a mouthful. OCCDA. Even that's a mouthful. The Outer City Defense Agency. Anyway, as for why Anji knew how the colonel's room looked, it was because at the very moment the elevator door opened, he felt that the surroundings were overly chilly. After turning around again, he met Lu Feng's gaze. The colonel leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed. Get back here. Anji pressed his lips together into a flat line. In truth, he was by no means close with Sarang. When he pressed the elevator down button, he even thought that if Sarang was not at home and showed reluctance at his request, he would only be able to awkwardly request Colin's help instead. That would be very awkward, I agree. He looked back at Lu Feng and was suddenly a bit distressed. He felt slightly wronged. The man clearly knew he didn't have any friends at the base. Feng also saw that something was amiss with him. What is it? Anji lowered his eyes but didn't know what to say. He actually wanted to speak up and stay in Lu Feng's room, but he feared the colonel's rejection. He heard Lu Feng let out a soft laugh. I was just teasing you. Lu Feng walked over and pulled him into the elevator. Let's go eat first. At night, you'll sleep with me. Mm-hmm. We know it's not the same, but like... Hoo-hoo-hoo. They ate dinner at the communal dining hall. This dinner was by no means tasty, and what's more, Lu Feng's order was a portion of mushroom soup. Oh boy. Whoops. But if he were to sleep with Lu Feng, of course it would be a bit better than sleeping with Sarang, and it would be much, much better than sleeping with Colin. Anji attributed this to the fact that he was only familiar with Lu Feng after all, and moreover, they had stayed overnight at each other's quarters twice before. Through bathing in the colonel's bathroom, he wiped himself dry, then quickly got into bed, while wrapped in a big snow-white towel. Holding the quilt in his arms, he sat on the innermost side of the bed. He didn't have pajamas. In the colonel's room, all the appliances seemed to be more perfect than the ones in his room, which may have been special treatment the military gave to him. However, no matter how special the treatment, there would be no extra quilt, nor would there be an extra pillow either. He voluntarily moved the pillow from the middle of the bed to the outer side. At that moment, a bouquet of red at the head of the bed caught his eye. There was a simple glass bottle there, and within the bottle were 3 bright red flowers with thorny stems and dark green leaves. 2 of them were already in full bloom. The last one was still a plump bud, sorry. Should know how to say that considering my name's Rosebud Reads, but apparently not. This was the first time Anji had seen plants inside the human base. This city made of iron and steel seemed to prohibit the existence of any living thing besides humans. The flower's fragrance drifted through the air. Just then, Lu Feng, who had been listening to his subordinates report the state of work affairs, ended the call and returned to the bedroom. That very moment, Lu Feng noticed he was looking at the bouquet. My mother's, he said. Madame Lu? Anji asked. Mm-hmm, Lu Feng said. His gaze also lingered on those 3 flowers. For a very long time, he looked outside. The night sky outside the window was very dark, with shadows flickering, and the hexagonal Garden of Eden stood tall next to the artificial magnetic pole. Following his gaze, Anji looked down as well. In this manner, the Garden of Eden really did look like a beehive. A thought suddenly occurred to him, and he looked back at the 3 bright red flowers at the head of the bed. He was a little familiar with this kind of color and shape, for it came from Anji's memory of a picture album from a long time ago. It was a commonly seen plant from when human civilization was still flourishing. Roses, he murmured. They're even rosebuds! Yo. They are roses, Lu Feng said. When the children in his class had free time, they would play games of house and pretend flower planting, using colored paper of various hues as flowers. However, it looked like the Garden of Eden had real roses. Does the Garden of Eden plant roses? He said. Lu Feng's reply was very concise. No. Just as Anji thought his response would stop there, Lu Feng spoke again. She likes plants, but the base doesn't have any. His voice was very calm. When I was 16, I was training out in the wilderness and collected some seeds. After the lighthouse confirmed that they were safe, I gave them to her. Then the madam planted them? Anji said. Lu Feng said, mm-hmm. Anji suddenly recalled the sealed plant seeds he saw in Lu Feng's office cabinet a month ago. He thought that Lu Feng must greatly value his mother. At the lighthouse today, Madame Lu had gone to submit some reports. She looked like she was a scientific researcher. So he asked, "Is Madame Lu a scientist?" Only after some time had passed did Lu Feng reply to him. "More or less." That moment, Lu Feng suddenly said, "You knew the girl from the Garden of Eden." Anji nodded. Lu Feng had already seen Lily, so he didn't have anything to hide. "How much do you know?" Guess the colonel was asking him about his degree of understanding of the Garden of Eden. Recalling Lily's word, he said, "I know the Rose Manifesto." Saw Lu Feng look out the window, seemingly recalling the past. Lu Feng said, "Allegedly, when she was 12 years old, because of her intellectual gifts, the base believed that compared to giving birth, she would bring greater contributions to humankind by throwing herself into scientific research. So she was sent to the lighthouse to study." "That's so amazing," Anji said. He was invariably curious about humans with superior intelligence. But afterward, she voluntarily applied to be transferred back to the Garden of Eden and bear the responsibility of birthing children while studying how to improve the technology of in vitro embryo culturing. "And after that?" Anji asked. "There is no after that," Lu Feng said. "It still holds true now." Anji recalled Madame Lu's appearance. Even though she wore a mask today, showing merely a pair of eyes, the impression she left upon him was very deep. He said, "She's very beautiful." Lu Feng said, "Thank you." Upon recalling the situation from the daytime, Anji asked, "Do you have a bad relationship with her?" "Yes." She blinked. "Why is that?" He felt that Lu Feng clearly cared about his mother very much. "She had always thought I was at the United Front Center, but in fact I chose to go to the trial court in the end." Lu Feng's tone was calm. "Perhaps I've killed too many." "She can't accept it?" "It was I who wasn't willing to maintain my relationship with her." Lu Feng picked up the pillow and tossed it to Anji's side. Anji caught the pillow and looked at Lu Feng. Strangely, he understood what Lu Feng was saying. In order to always be correct, always be clear-headed, and always be impassive, the arbiter had to utterly exile himself. The word exile abruptly appeared in Anji's mind. "The Garden of Eden and the trial court are doing opposing things," he said. "Is it because you cannot waver?" "Shut up." Lu Feng leaned over and yanked the pillow from Anji's arms, then lifted him up and put the pillow beneath his head. "You can't even keep your eyes open anymore." Sinking into the soft pillow, Anji felt his consciousness gradually blur. He really was sleepy, and this night he'd been forcibly trying to stay alert the entire time. Before completely falling asleep, he saw Lu Feng pick up a silvery white case, which was something a staff member had given to Lu Feng when they left the lighthouse. Anji didn't know what it was, and he thought that he didn't need to know either. The colonel always had his reasons for doing things. Anji folded clothes that had been set to one side, some light gray dust on the shirt collar area. Neither the training grounds nor the lighthouse has this sort of thing, but Lu Feng also knew that there was a small-scale disturbance in the Garden of Eden surveillance during a period of time, so there was no way of tracing Anji's whereabouts. Okay. Oh, this is from Lu Feng's perspective. Lu Feng looked away from it, and his finger pressed the button on the suitcase. The silver suitcase opened, and wisps of cold air escaped from within. Inside the refrigerated layer was a long and slender syringe, its contents an aquamarine hue. Next to the suitcase was his gun. After his gaze lingered briefly on the two items, he turned to look at Anji, his fingers resting on the gun stock. Right at that moment, Anji rolled over and gently leaned against him. He was asleep. Like a small animal curled up inside the snow-white quilt, he revealed a smooth and milk-white neck and shoulder, relaxed eyebrows, and slightly curled eyelashes, his breath rising and falling in an even and calm rhythm. Part of his fingers showed from beneath the quilt, gently curled, but it was also a very relaxed demeanor. Not a single nerve was tensed up. As he slept here without the slightest alertness or vigilance, it was like he was sleeping in a place he wholeheartedly trusted to be safe. He believed that in this place, no one would harm him. Lu Feng suddenly recalled that day from 2 months earlier. That day was the first time they met. Anji looked into his eyes and said to him, he hadn't gotten wounded. He had long ago gotten accustomed to the sight of disputes and denials and interrogations and rage were things he had to encounter countless times every single day. But that was his first time seeing a pair of eyes like that. He did not ask questions, nor did he fail to understand. There was only grief. Yet within the grief was an innocent calm, as if, so long as Lu Feng gave a reason, he would accept anything and forgive anything. He had never paid attention to anyone's pleas before, but that one time he lifted the white cloth covering the corpse to reveal that person's wound. A person's wavering starts from the first time their heart softens. That's deep. Like, wow. Oof. Okay. So that is the end of chapter 23. I'm going to keep going. You know what? I think we may just finish the book tonight because this is literally all that we have left. So we might be finishing this tonight. Just need to stretch for a second. Right? I'm excited. Yeah. Got a heating pack back here. I'm just gonna fix it. It fell. It's a long time sitting. Okay. Right? I'm excited too. Okay. Okay. Chapter 24. What did you do to it? Well, guess we're going to be learning about something new. Anji had a dream. He seemed to be standing above an abyss of flowing black water. Black water? Okay, continuing. And in front of him was a boundless, empty world. The feeling of danger gripped him like a hand. There must have been something in that faraway darkness observing him. He couldn't catch his breath. Feeling that it was dangerous, he unconsciously looked around and took 2 steps back. Within the dangerous gaze, he wanted to find someone or get close to someone to obtain a sense of safety. Thus, his hand uneasily moved, gently grabbing the corner of Lu Feng's sleeve. His breathing sped up slightly, as if he was afraid. Lu Feng shut the silver refrigerated box, threw the emptied disposable syringe into the trash bin at the head of the bed, put the gun back at the head of the bed within easy reach. After doing all that, Anji's somewhat sped up breathing calmed down, but his beautiful eyebrows were still slightly furrowed. A tiny bead of bright red blood welled up on one side of his neck, but no more than 3 minutes later, the bead of blood coagulated into a red spot. It was a pinhole, but the substance that was injected would not do any harm to his body beside this spot of blood. It was like a small animal with soft fur, having a sort of fragile comfort that seemed very easy to utterly destroy. It also seemed very, very easy to protect completely. Lu Feng expressionlessly looked at him. After a long while, he reached out a hand and rested his fingertips on the skin at the center of Anji's eyebrows, like a dragonfly resting on the water's surface. That pair of furrowed eyebrows slowly relaxed, and no more than 3 minutes later he had fallen asleep again, as peacefully as he did at the start. When Anji woke up, the entire room had brightened. It was the sort of brightness of 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. The fear of being late made him wake up completely. Then he discovered that the towel he had wrapped himself in last night had opened up and slid down no small amount, leaving his upper back bare. Ooh. And his hand was clenched around the hem of a certain human's clothes, while he leaned his whole body against this human, his face pressed into the other party's shoulder. If it had been Sarang, Anji would have apologized to him in accordance with human etiquette. If it had been Colin, she would have immediately gotten away at top speed. But it was a certain colonel named Liu who often got mad at him. Anji quietly loosened his grip, then leaned his head to look at him. But to his surprise, Lu Feng didn't get mad at him this time. He pulled up the quilt to cover Anji's exposed arms and shoulders back up, and then said, "It's 8:30. Today, Anji's workplace was still the lighthouse, but the job tasks were terribly dry and boring. And this Lu Feng person also seemed to not have any proper work today, staying together with him the whole time. The scene within the laboratory could be summed up as Sinan looking at Lily, Lily looking at Sinan, him looking at Lily, and Lu Feng looking at him. After half the day had gone by, Sinan's condition unexpectedly made steady improvements. The amount of time his brainwaves were stable increased from a brief 1 or 2 seconds to a sustained 4 seconds straight. During these brief periods of lucidity, he would knock on the glass wall in regular patterns, as if he were telling Lily that he was there. The doctor was very happy upon hearing the results, but said that he couldn't leave for the time being. So he had them continue on their own. During the periods when Sinan completely lost his sanity, Lily would talk to Anji. "I still want to fly out," she said. "The outside is so big." "You all can't go out?" Anji asked. "No, they say the outside is too dangerous," Lily said. "When I was little, I begged them to let me out for 5 minutes, but they didn't agree. I was angry at them every day. So the madam will tell me not to squabble with them. She said that all of the base itself is made up of the Garden of Eden's children. Children will sometimes be wayward and will sometimes hurt their mother, but it's all understandable. Moreover, the things we eat, the places we live, and the electricity we use are all the basest things." Lily sighed, but for a girl who was still at the age of a youngling to do this, it was rather incongruous. Incongruous. There we go. Anji patted her head. "Only Madame Lu can go outside. She is a scientist," Lily continued. "I want to be a scientist too. I heard them say that previously embryos had to grow within the body for at least 5 months before they could be removed, so it was very painful. But the madam and the lighthouse's research teams have constantly been cutting down this time, so now it only needs 1 month. That's crazy. That's absolutely insane." Anji silently listened to her talk. Just then, Lu Feng's communicator rang. He picked it up, and Anji faintly heard a few words like sample, growth, and verify from the other side. After hanging up, Lu Feng said to him, "I'm going out for a bit." "Okay," Anji replied. When Lu Feng's footsteps had receded in the corridor, Lily suddenly came closer to Anji and said in a very mysterious tone, "Colonel Liu is the madam's child. Did you know?" Anji looked at the girl. After 2 days of interacting, she had become much livelier. He said, "Do you even know this?" Because I'm smart. Lily lifted her chin slightly. They only know how to sleep, but I know everything. Regarding the words she said before, Anji wasn't too interested, but upon her mention of Lu Feng, his curiosity was piqued again. He asked, "What do you know?" The madam's communicator has always had pictures of the colonel. I've seen them before. Lily swung her little legs on the chair. They said that only the colonel is Madame's real child because he didn't use a machine to supplement his development. Anji thought that Lu Feng and Madame Lu's relationship was indeed very special. The Garden of Eden's children didn't know exactly who their own parents were. The only thing that accompanied them since birth was their ID card. Lily continued, "It seemed that there were two reasons. The first one is that the colonel's condition at that time wasn't stable, therefore was unsuited to in vitro culture. The other one, everyone is only guessing." "What are they guessing about?" Anji asked. "The madam stayed outside the Garden of Eden before. Afterwards, she also wanted to go to the lighthouse to hold meetings and wanted to negotiate with the people outside so she could go out. I'm guessing the madam had fallen in love with someone outside. I bet Colonel Lu is the child of the madam and her lover." Upon saying this, Lily looked at Anji, her chin resting in her hand. "Are you Colonel Lu's lover?" I love kids. They get right to the heart of the issue and ask those hard questions. Anji pondered the implication of this word for a while, then shook his head. "Then have you ever contributed sperm?" "You seem to have already come of age," Lily said. "Although you don't have a lover, you probably already have children." "I don't," Anji said with a frown. But what?" Anji slowly shook his head and said nothing more. He didn't have a child in the human sense, but he had his spore that he didn't know the location of. If he rashly asked Lu Feng, he feared that he would expose his identity as a xenogenic. Yet, if he continued to enter the ventilation pipes to search, there was an ever-present risk of getting lost or being exposed. The only thing he knew was that based on Lu Feng's notebook, his spore was most likely within the lighthouse. And now, he was in the lighthouse. But in the face of those complicated access doors and secretive laboratories, he had no idea how he should go look for it. Clearly, he may have already gotten very close to his spore. During these 2 days in the lighthouse, every time he had this thought, Anji felt distressed. Lily said, "Are you unhappy?" "Mm-hmm," Anji said. He wasn't a complete mushroom. An incomplete mushroom couldn't be happy, no matter what. Right at that moment, soft tapping noises sounded again. Sinan had recovered his sanity. Lily promptly abandoned him and went up to Sinan. Anji became even more dejected. The sound of footsteps came from the corridor. It was Lu Feng and the doctor returning together. The doctor was talking to Lu Feng. "What did you do to it?" "What could I have done to it?" Lu Feng said. "It was always completely motionless, as if it was dead, until these 2 days that you frequented the lighthouse, when it suddenly began to grow. I think it's not a coincidence. Furthermore, as it soaked a nutrient solution, it was always it has always floated irregularly. Why is it that when you went next to the culture chamber, it would float over to get close to you?" Lu Feng coldly replied, "Isn't that what you and your people are supposed to research? You must first provide enough information to us. What special relationship do you have with it?" I think they're talking about the spore. "I took it, sealed it up, and sent it to the lighthouse." Lu Feng's tone of voice gradually became colder, which was a sign that he did not wish to continue this conversation. "That's it. This is a key project. You have to cooperate with their research, as you like." Their voices drew closer as the two of them returned to the laboratory. The doctor walked back over to the instrument, and Lu Feng took the illustrated base ornaments handbook from Anji's backpack and leafed through it to kill time. Upon recalling their conversation just now, Anji gradually felt a trace of suspicion. He slowly looked at Lu Feng. I think he suspects what we suspect. Lu Feng, feeling the weight of his gaze, lifted his head from the book pages to meet Anji's eyes. Anji looked at him. What did you go do? Lu Feng gave him a flat look, but didn't directly answer his question. Instead, he responded, Anji saw that he looked unwilling to answer. But when he thought about the clues he might get, he still plucked up his courage and said, something got close to you. Lu Feng raised his eyebrows. Nothing got close to me. Just now, the doctor said, I went to go look at a project. Lu Feng's tone of voice was nonchalant. Nothing else happened. Anji was going to die of anger thanks to this person. He wanted to ask Lu Feng what project he was going to look at, but this person was obliquely saying he didn't do anything. A laboratory called for him. The doctor returned to the instrument. It was normal work, and he came back after cooperating. But he may need to make a few more trips. With that, the doctor began to concentrate on studying the earlier footage of Sinan. Lu Feng's way of thinking was difficult to figure out. Since Anji failed to grasp the key point, he would have left it at that, but the doctor unexpectedly also gave a reply that didn't answer his question. Having received no information whatsoever, Anji sat next to Lily, his mood restless. Felt both dejection because he didn't get an answer and self-hatred because he couldn't ask too obviously, lest he reveal his identity. He even had the thought of following Lu Feng the next time he went. Lu Feng say next to him, focus on your work. Anji was left speechless. At 5 p.m., it was time for Lily to go back. After she went back, Sinan no longer lucidly knocked on the wall and began to bump about wildly in his cell. Anji took some sample notes on the day's situation, and the doctor told him he could go back. Anji looked at Lu Feng. Lu Feng said, I'm staying here. The doctor said, he's on duty tonight. Oh, Anji said. Various experiments took place within the lighthouse, a majority of them having to do with research on xenogenics. Sometimes, when improper operation or accidents happened, staff members would be infected, and therefore the trial court also had permanent staff in the lighthouse. With that thought, he suddenly felt that things were somewhat difficult to deal with. He didn't have his ID card, so he couldn't go back to his home, and if Lu Feng didn't go home, there were even fewer places he could go. With that thought, he saw Lu Feng take out his ID card from the chest pocket of his uniform and gave it to him. Go back by yourself. Anji accepted it and said, thank you. The doctor clicked his tongue. Anji asked, are you eating dinner here? Lu Feng continued looking at the illustrated ornaments handbook and said flatly, Anji asked, what are you eating? The compressed nutrient tablets that the neighboring laboratory in the Garden of Eden recently invented together, the doctor said as he tapped on the keyboard. For the time being, it's only provided for use within the lighthouse. With those words, the force he tapped the keyboard with increased by a few degrees. It's the nastiest thing I've eaten in my entire life. Anji stood in place and thought for a moment. He realized that the ventilation pipes were empty, and the lighthouse was also empty. The only one who truly had any connection to finding a spore was Lu Feng. He said to Lu Feng, would you like me to bring you some food? Lu Feng lifted his head and looked at him. Within those cold eyes, his emotions couldn't be seen. Anji saw that he had also happened to flip to the page with the PL-1109 fighter plane. Lu Feng didn't reply. Ji said in a small voice, "Then I'll bring you something." The doctor clicked his tongue again. The doctor said, "I want some too." Lu Feng said, "There's none for you." The doctor turned to look at Anji. "I want to drink tomato soup." "There might not be any," Anji said. By no means did he lie. Apart from potatoes, the residential area's food supply was different every day. Specifically, it depended on the Garden of Eden's production circumstances at the time. However, there were indeed tomatoes among the ingredients today. Anji stood in front of the container that held the tomatoes and hesitated for a while. Then he turned around to face the icebox where the mushrooms were. He remembered that yesterday, when eating dinner with Lu Feng had chosen mushroom soup from among the identically watery potato soup, tomato soup, and mushroom soup that the communal dining hall provided that night. His choice made Anji feel somewhat uncomfortable, but he internally debated with himself for 2 minutes, but in the end he took 2 portions of mushrooms. The kind of mushrooms that the base cultivated were a grayish-white and had rounded stems and soft caps. He often came here to buy ingredients, or to buy things, so the staff members of the ingredients area already recognized him. "Cooking mushrooms tonight?" "Mm-hmm," Anji said. "Do I need other ingredients?" Under the guidance of the staff member, Anji took back fresh meat and a packet of seasoning. He swiped Lu Feng's card. Originally, he would have felt that the cost of these ingredients was huge, but compared to the balance, it seemed unexpectedly trivial. Anji picked up a knife, took a deep breath, and then began chopping the mushrooms, which were so soft that they split into halves with just a gentle cut. I don't know why, but that just seems wrong. I mean, not so much because some of them can be parasitic and probably cannibalistic. I don't know. I don't know that much about mushrooms. It just feels wrong. Mushroom soup also took much less time than other soups. After the small chunks of fresh chicken were cooked through in the boiling water, he put the packet of seasoning in, then added the mushrooms. Before long, a light and fragrant aroma wafted from the water. G closed the pressure cooker lid, and after setting the timer, he left the kitchen. He didn't have anything to do, so he watered the roses in the colonel's room, and after tidying up the room, he turned on the TV in the living room. It was the exact time for the news broadcast. The image appeared, and Anji was surprised to see a familiar face. Hubbard, the mercenary team captain who had once ordered a mannequin for Mr. Shaw and also helped Mr. Shaw get Lu Feng's information. At the time, if he hadn't taken his team out on a mission again, perhaps he would have been amongst the accused as well. At present, the work of recalling mercenaries is progressing smoothly. This morning, all members of mercenary team AR-137 returned to the base. This is the only team who can perform 6-star level missions apart from the base's military. They have brought back precious samples and the latest information on the outside world. Our reporter has interviewed AR-137's captain, Mr. Hubbard. In the frame, Hubbard, dressed in field equipment, had just gotten out of an armored vehicle. A reporter was interviewing him. "Welcome back, Mr. Hubbard." "Thank you," Hubbard said. They're all, I'm picturing them all as, big buff dudes. So they're all getting the deep voice treatment. At one side, a staff member who was guiding them to get their blood tested said, "The main city welcomes you." "Thank you," Miss Hubbard said. "The base's situation surprised me greatly." The reporter said, "You recall your recall date is somewhat later than that of other mercenary teams. Did you encounter difficulties along the way?" "No." Hubbard's reply was very terse. "The signal was bad. I just received the recall message." The reporter smiled. May I ask what region you return from? The fringes of the abyss. How is the situation there now? The monster shapes are even more varied. The abyss is indeed a very fearsome place. What did you bring back from there? Samples. Thank you for your contributions to the base, the reporter said. You're welcome. Anji felt that, with regard to being terse, Hubbard might be able to compete with Lu Fang, but his eyes were not as good-looking as Lu Fang's. I love how nonchalantly he's like, yeah, he's kind of deadpan, but my boy's prettier. The frame switched back to the news anchor. As far as we know, the returning mercenary teams will be classified as part of the military establishment after their meritorious feats are accounted for, and they will continue serving the base. After that news broadcast finished, up next were a few unimportant pieces of information. Of the things that happened every day in the main city, there weren't many worth reporting on. Most of the time, the anchors reported on the new progress in the lighthouse's scientific research, and there were many specialized words and jargon, which made Anji drowsy. The pressure cooker in the kitchen let out a long whistle, rescuing Anji. After opening the lid, a rich fragrance wafted into his face. The soup had become very thick and showed a velvety texture, and snow-white mushrooms bobbed up and down within. He tasted a mouthful. Feeling satisfied, he happily put enough for 3 people into a thermos, planning to take it to the lighthouse. But right when he walked out the kitchen door, he was stunned. On the news was a silver laboratory with complicated machinery all around, and in the center of the laboratory was a cylindrical glass tank, inside which was a clear pale green liquid. And inside the tank, that was the height of a man, there was a tiny little white thing quietly floating in the very center. Anji's eyes widened, and he strode to the TV screen. That exact moment, the camera drew closer, giving a close-up of the little white thing. White like snow, a soft mass, its main body was like a cloud floating in the water, its eyes just like the mushrooms Anji used in his cooking today. Apart from that, the fine snow-white hype had also spread out, soaking in the water and gently swaying in the wake of its trajectory as it floated in the water. Anji practically stopped breathing. He definitely wouldn't mistake his own spore, although compared to when it left him, it seemed to have grown a bit bigger. Anji lifted his hand. His finger trembled a little as he laid it against the TV's ice-cold screen, as if he was touching the surface of the tank, and only a glass wall separated him from the snow-white thing. But then the newscaster's voice broke the illusion. 4 months ago, the anonymous fungus sample collected by the trial court was listed as a first-class observation subject, for it has never undergone any mutations from its fundamental shape. As a result, the lighthouse believes this sample has a high research value. Perhaps, by studying this sample, we can reveal the process and principles of biological infection and mutation. Anji frowned deeply. As expected, his spore had been taken for research. The news broadcaster said, according to the researchers, in the past 4 months, the sample has maintained a half-dead state. However, in the last 2 days, it has unexpectedly resumed activity and increased in size. This is very exciting news. Anji's heart thumped hard. He knew the spore recognized him, too. Why else would it only start growing bigger in exactly those 2 days when he had been staying in the lighthouse? The spore sensed him. It definitely also wished to return to him. The announcer continued talking. The laboratory contacted the trial court and confirmed the sample's growth direction is similar to the original main body. At the same time in the frame, spore floated unsteadily in a certain direction. Anji thought that this must have been the direction he was in relative to the laboratory. The spore wanted to find him. In the very next second, a human figure appeared next to the glass tank. The person's body was outside the frame, and there was only a vague reflection, so he didn't know who it was. Anji wanted this person to get away from his spore. The situation was the exact opposite. This person reached out with a hand to gently touch the surface of the tank with their fingertips, the fingers slender and knuckles very beautiful. She frowned, for he was very familiar with the shape of this hand. He was also very familiar with this person's sleeve as well as the silver buttons. She ground his teeth. He confirmed that this person trying to touch his spore was beyond a doubt that bastard Lu Fang. However, right at the moment, the spore floated over to that bastard and its fine snow-white hype stretched out and touched his fingers across the tank. Why would it do that? And she was confused. I think his spore has a crush. Canon cannibalism. Yes, I guess so. I guess that would be the fan fiction tag. Technically cannibalism? Question mark. Okay. Chapter 25. A resplendent Milky Way. Anji helplessly watched his spore reach out its hype and touch Lu Fang through the glass. When Lu Fang's hand left, the hype even drooped, its appearance carrying a hint of loss. Yeah, he's totally got like a baby crush. Little puppy dog crush. Seeing his spore act this way, Anji felt a bit of distress as well, as if he had just personally experienced it. When Lu Fang lifted his hand, Anji didn't want him to get close to the spore, but when the man let go, Anji wanted him to stay a little bit longer. In this brief second, the camera switched to a researcher in a white coat who said that the sample showed an unprecedented inertia against infection and mutation. After 4 months of analysis and research, the sample's extracts will not infect any organisms. Likewise, when we infected the sample with mutated organism extracts, we have not observed any changes whatsoever in its composition, the researcher said. The lighthouse believes this may be our breakthrough point to overcoming mutations. But he's just a little baby. He's just a little baby. I hope they're not being mean to baby. And she gripped the thermos handle. The human said that his spore was the breakthrough point to overcoming mutations, which meant that the spore would be under heavy protection. Finally, the newscaster summarized the news in a very optimistic tone and said that the future of the base was bright and thanked the researchers for their efforts. After the news ended, the weather forecast followed. According to the lighthouse's observations, within the next 3 days, the region where the base was located would welcome a substantial rise in temperature. There was a reminder to all areas, especially the lighthouse's laboratories and Garden of Eden's crop husbandry base, to respond to it. Anji was not in the mood to continue listening. He left home and got onto a shuttle. Along the way, he pondered how exactly he should get close to his spore. Firstly, he had to know the exact location of the laboratory, then observe the researchers' work patterns. Under normal circumstances, researchers wouldn't stay in the laboratory for all hours of the day. If he could enter the laboratory through the ventilation pipes when nobody was there, then think of a way to take the spore back into himself. Then he could think of a way to leave the human base and return to the abyss. If the experimental sample was stolen, the humans would chase it to the end. Apart from escaping, he seemed to have no other options. At that thought, he blankly turned his head and looked at the city with its lights blazing in the night through the shuttle's glass. The aurora had already risen, its green light fluctuating in the night sky, swiftly changing, just like the flow of time. The announcement sounded. He had reached the Twin Towers. It's still so weird that that's in the book. Anji got off, holding the thermos in his arms, then swiped Lu Fang's ID card to open the door, entered the hall, and went upstairs. In the silver corridor, every laboratory was brightly lit. Various instruments emitted sounds at various rates. the back and forth rising and falling. He found the doctor's laboratory, but only Dr. G and his assistant were inside. You've come. The doctor lifted his head and looked at Anji. Lu Feng will be back later. All right. Anji put the thermos on the workbench, unscrewed it open, and filled a bowl for the doctor. The insulation device's function was very good. The soup was boiling hot, and the rich fragrance wafted out along with the rising steam, filling the laboratory. My God. The doctor picked up the tableware Anji handed over. You're wonderful. Anji smiled. You aren't eating? The doctor asked. I'll wait for him to come back, Anji replied. The doctor clicked his tongue. I'm not waiting for him, the doctor said, then looked at the assistant. Continue rolling the clip. The assistant replied, All right. Anji looked at the computer interface in front of the doctor. The window at the very center was playing footage of Sinan. Beneath the window was another window that was partially covered, but a mailing list was visible. The doctor had sent one email each to the recipients, Underground City and Research Institute. His gaze turned back to Sinan in the footage, the gray bee. Lily was aimlessly chatting with him, and in the previous second she was even saying, Will you have honey? Which was promptly followed by, Is it more fun to be a person or a bee? He said, It's gotten bigger. Moreover, it was a very easily detectable increase in size. The doctor ate a piece of chicken and narrowed his eyes as he looked at the screen. Indeed, the assistant chimed in. An increase of 10 kilograms. That's a lot. What has it eaten? It has taken no sustenance, the assistant replied. The doctor said, It's like this yet again. I shouldn't have considered the question while eating, he said. I was very happy. She asked him, What's the matter? The change and growth of xenogenics not only violates the existing definition of biology, but also has always challenged the laws of conservation of energy. Doctor looked at Sinan. Organisms take in energy from the outside world and convert it into the self. But when humans change into xenogenics, their bodies may grow tenfold in size, and the muscle mass is also many times higher than that of humans. Where does the energy come from? As petri dishes, human flesh can't provide that much. They're practically made out of thin air. Anji said nothing. He didn't have this knowledge, but the creatures in the abyss were indeed all very massive. Never mind, the doctor said with a sigh. The complete failure of our knowledge framework isn't something recent. He continued devouring the bowl of delicious mushroom soup, but his gaze was still fixed on the screen. When he was almost done drinking, Anji asked, Do you want more? The doctor didn't reply. Anji looked at his eyes and discovered that he was staring relentlessly at the screen. Replay it, he said. The assistant replayed the video from 1 minute prior. Lily, already worn out from talking, was leaning against the glass wall. Don't bump into the wall anymore. It hurts so much. Then she added, although it's very tiring to constantly talk, the lighthouse is more fun than the Garden of Eden. Right at that moment, Sinan recovered his lucidity for a brief spell, and his fluff and spine-covered mouthparts gently tapped on the glass. You're awake, Lily said. The gentle trembling mouthparts continued tapping a few more times. The doctor frowned. Half speed. Play it again. The frame was enlarged and the speed was reduced, focusing on the bee's movements as it tapped the glass. The intervals of the first and second taps were the same, tapping again after a long pause, then another long pause. The doctor took out a notebook and swiftly made marks with a ballpoint pen. This time after the pause, there were 3 consecutive taps with the same interval. As he spoke, he jotted down on the paper the numbers 2, 1, and 3. After the segment of finished playing, the doctor said, the next recorded segment when he was lucid. The assistant began adjusting the video timing. It looked like he was the doctor's student. Are you suspecting that he's transmitting a message via the tapping frequency? The doctor said, "This is absolutely not normal, but he's just a 6-year-old child." He looked at Anji. "What do you cover in your mathematics and logic classes?" Anji said, "Arithmetic, geometry, and reasoning." "Will you tell them stories outside of the class?" the doctor said, "such as about ratio code and such?" "That's not right," he then said. "He hasn't entered Class A, so he wouldn't have such a high IQ," Anji said. "He got full scores on his tests. Not being able to enter Class A was because of psychological factors." The doctor nodded to indicate that he understood. Begin watching the next video. In this segment of footage, the period Sinan was lucid for was very short. He swiftly tapped twice, the interval different than before. The doctor drew 2 very closely spaced dots on the paper. Next segment. In the next segment, within the same span of time, Sinan tapped the wall 7 times. Then the next segment, in this recorded segment, he was lucid for a full 5 seconds. The first half of the recording, his behavior was surprisingly consistent with the first segment of footage. 2 taps, 1 tap, 3 taps. After completing the third set of taps, he paused for a long span of time, then swiftly tapped twice immediately afterward. The segment of footage was like an amalgam of the first and second segments. I know amalgamation, but it's just amalgam. The doctor took notes in his notebook, and the videos continued to play. In the 5th segment of footage, he once again evenly tapped 7 times in a row. After that, in all the lucid fragments, his tapping maintained the repetition until 5 o'clock rolled around and Lily was taken back to the Garden of Eden staff. The doctor recorded a string of numbers in his notebook. 2, 1, 3, 1, 1, 7, 2, 1, 3, 1, 1, 7, 2. The assistant said, "Do you want to get someone well-versed in mathematics to come and decode it?" "No need," the doctor said. "The message he wants to convey is very short, so it won't be difficult. Let me think." Anji frowned as he looked at the string of numbers. Humans communicated through language, so he didn't know how numbers were to assume the function of transmitting messages, unless the numbers implied characters. The doctor's brow furrowed back. The doctor's furrowed brow seemed to relax a bit. Anji hesitated for a while before saying, "Is it B-A-C?" "The alphabet." The doctor scribbled down the letters B-A-C on the page. She looked at the recording from before. After 2-1-3, Sinan had knocked twice in a row. Should have been Daka. The second knock consisted of 7 hits, and the number 7 corresponded with G. In accordance with Anji's thinking, the doctor wrote down the 6-letter Bakag, then underlined the consecutive A's. The assistant said, "The interval between the 2 knocks is very short. It's a different expression of language." 11, the doctor suddenly said. 2 short knocks don't represent 2 separate ones, but rather is a double-digit 11. The letter corresponding to 11 was K. So the string of letters became BACK, B-A-C-K-G. Doctor asked, "How was his English?" "Full marks as well," Anji said. Foreign languages accounted for nearly half of the content in the Language and Language Arts course. If these children were to enter the lighthouse after growing up, consulting the documents of human civilizations would require very high levels of linguistic competence. Back. The doctor uttered one word, moved the letter G up to the very front and narrowed his eyes. Go back. A very concise expression. In other languages, it wouldn't be so short. Furthermore, the assistant said, furthermore, it's within the scope of Lily's understanding. If she is able to notice, she will understand it. The doctor nodded. He wanted to make her go back. What does this mean? The video continued to play. Lily said listlessly to Sinan, who was throwing himself and flying around wildly. The doctor said it's very dangerous in the base now. You have to help us or everyone will change into monsters. It's very scary. The assistant said, if they are very good friends, that means the Garden of Eden is a safe place, and he knows or predicts the outside world is very dangerous, so he wants her to go back. But it was in precisely the Garden of Eden that this boy was infected and turned into a xenogenic. The doctor thought for a while. Could he be saying that the first xenogenic appeared in the Garden of Eden? The trial court's investigation center was transferred there, so that it was a faint strategy instead? Do you want to hold a meeting and discuss it? The assistant asked. The doctor glanced at the laboratory door. How come Lu Feng still hasn't returned yet? He picked up the communicator and dialed, but a busy tone came from the other side. The assistant said, perhaps he entered the signal-jammed laboratory. She astutely picked up on the opportunity and seized the opportunity to ask, what did he go to do? The same project from this afternoon, the doctor said. They believe the colonel can advance the growth of a sample, so they insist that he go over there and babysit. Anji said without hesitation, I can go find him. Smiling, the doctor looked at him. You two have a really good relationship. That's fine too. Bring him back and have dinner while you're at it, the doctor said. That laboratory's level is very high, as it's combined between the military and the lighthouse. Take the elevator up to the 13th floor, cross the corridor bridge, and look for room D1344. All right, Anji replied. He turned and left the laboratory. It was obvious that Lu Feng was with his spore again now. Probably this person was somewhere very close to the glass tank, or once again holding out his hand to play games of touch with the spore. He didn't know why this sort of thing would happen, but he absolutely didn't believe that Lu Feng advances the spore's growth nonsense. When the spore was taken away, it hadn't yet reached the point of maturity where it could grow by itself. It would only grow when it was either within his body or next to him. He's a little upset that his spore grew. Yeah, it really is kind of like a pet that likes your partner better than you. He's upset. He is not having it. The elevator arrived, and inside were two people. They were researchers, and they were discussing the recent weather. A rise in temperature after high winds? The recent weather has been very extreme. Summer has come, so it counts as normal. Compared to a rise in temperature, the base is more afraid of drops in temperature. That's true. But I heard this is because of fluctuations in the magnetic field strength. Is it a problem with the artificial magnetic pole? The neighboring laboratory observed several abnormal fluctuations. Our east pole has no problem, so everyone believes that the frequency of the west pole is being manually adjusted. Wow. The researcher smiled. Has there been new progress in the underground city base's technology? I'm guessing so, otherwise no one would dare to touch the magnetic pole. They've already contacted the United Front Center, applying to open strong frequency shortwave communication and communicate with the underground city base. Everything is changing for the better. Everything was indeed changing for the better, for he was about to see his spore. The elevator door opened and Anji walked out. Corridor bridge connecting the buildings of the lighthouse and the United Front Center was very wide, and both sides were transparent, being made from glass or some other material. Laboratory D1344 was very easy to find. He knocked on the door. A female voice said, "Please enter." As soon as Anji entered, he saw the glass tank in the center. It was identical to the one on the news, and that small white mass. Next to the small white mass was Lu Feng in his black uniform. He had put his fingers on the tank, and the spore was once again bobbing towards him. Then this person withdrew his finger, put it in a different place, much further away. Then the spore slowly changed direction, going to a new place. When it had almost caught up, Lu Feng changed places again, deliberately not allowing it to touch. He's teasing the spore! When Anji saw this, he was so angry he almost forgot to breathe, whereas Lu Feng's expression looked impassive when he was in fact completely joyful. He seemed to be finding pleasure in bullying and playing with the spore. That very moment, Lu Feng lifted his head and looked over at Anji, eyebrows raised. She looked around. With sophisticated instruments and surveillance equipment, as well as a dozen or so researchers, could only look at his spore from afar. No, he could do one other thing, which was to take away this person who was bullying his spore. He walked over the tank, but hatefully, the spore didn't approach him, but rather continued to linger around Lu Feng. Lu Feng's tone was very light. What is it? Anji said in a very unkind tone. She could go back and eat. There seemed to be a trace of a smile in the gaze Lu Feng looked at him with. Unexpectedly, playing with the spore made the man this happy. Lu Feng walked over to him and then said to a researcher, I'm leaving. The researcher replied, Please be sure to come tomorrow as well. He gritted his teeth as he took one last look at the little spore floating helplessly in the nutrient solution, and the laboratory door mercilessly shut right in front of him. He and Lu Feng walked through the corridor. He said, Are you coming here tomorrow too? Mm-hmm. Were you playing with the sample? I'm cooperating with the study. Anji wouldn't believe his blatant lies. He didn't say anything, and they turned around a corner and arrived at the corridor bridge leading to the lighthouse. On either side was the city's night sky and the aurora on the horizon. But Lu Feng seemed to have sensed his mood. You're unhappy? Anji said nothing. Lu Feng stopped walking and looked at him. Anji turned to look at the aurora outside, and the entire world seemed to go quiet for a second. Right at that moment, Anji's pupils sharply contracted. A sharp pain traveled through his entire body. The light was too strong, so he unconsciously shut his eyes. Just a moment ago, the aurora that filled the sky released a burst of light that was as bright as day, cleaving the sky like a flash of green lightning. Lu Feng grabbed his shoulder and yanked him down, pressing him to the ground. The two of them rolled over once. All of it happened within tenths of a second. He wasn't hurt by the impact, for Lu Feng had protected him with his arms. He opened his eyes and discovered that he had been brought back into the corridor. Lu Feng pulled him up. The inside of Anji's head buzzed. He looked at the outside of the corridor bridge and was stupefied. The aurora was disappearing. All of it. After the short-lived burst just now, it was like an ebb tide disappearing in the night sky. The color faded within 10 short seconds and then completely disappeared. A resplendent Milky Way spanned the indigo night sky. He had never seen such a sight before. Then his gaze lowered. The entire human city's lights were blinking wildly, complementing the Milky Way. The corridor lights flickered madly, and chaotic sounds came from laboratories as several researchers ran out. Lu Feng pulled Anji back to a place where the outside wasn't visible, then asked grimly to a researcher hurrying past, What happened to the magnetic field? Okay, that is end of chapter 25. Things are heating up. Ooh. It's getting exciting. He's so upset his spore is ignoring him for his boo. Okay. Chapter 26. When the aurora lights up again, the colonel will return. Why does that sound like so romantic or like epic? When the aurora lights up again, the colonel will return. Very fantasy-esque. The emergency power has been activated. The emergency initial communication channel has been activated. The emergency defenses have been activated. The ventilation system has been activated. The radiation defense windows have descended. All departments, please stand by. In the corridor amidst the chaotic footsteps, sorry about that, and shouting, the broadcast system was turned on. It was no longer a robotic voice, but rather a human female. Oh, I messed that up. Oops. In the wake of the voice, muffled clunk, clunk sounds came continuously from all directions. Anji looked at the connecting corridor once again. Ice-cold steel curtains had dropped abruptly, blocking all windows. It looked very thick. He recalled how Poet had said that once the magnetic field disappeared, the radiation and solar wind from the cosmos would immediately attack the Earth's surface. Thus, he knew that when Lu Feng pulled him away from the corridor just now, it was to leave the possible scope of the cosmic radiation. As the Constitution from the era in which human science and technology were at its peak, the thickness and special materials of the main city's walls were able to defend against the radiation's assault. After the lights of the United Front Center's building flickered madly, they lit steadily again, but the glow was now much weaker than before, displaying a feeble paleness. The sound of a researcher dialing a number on his communicator came from the closest laboratory. He was too anxious, so his voice was very loud. It could be heard throughout the entire corridor. D1342 requesting an increase in power supply. The instruments cannot stop. A voice came from another laboratory as well. D1343 requesting emergency power, otherwise valuable samples will be inactivated. Who would answer their requests, and whether or not they would be fulfilled, Anji didn't know. He looked in the direction of D1344 and unconsciously grabbed the edge of Lu Feng's sleeve. Lu Feng looked down at him and said, "It's fine." Anji nodded. The announcements continued broadcasting. With the persons in charge of the Equipment Center, City Defense Agency, Emergency Response Department, and Logistics Division, please proceed to Conference Room 1 on the 17th floor of the United Front. Please refrain from taking the elevators and use the passages to go upstairs and downstairs. Requesting the Lighthouse's Magnetic Field Observation Office to immediately contact the United Front Center. Requesting the Lighthouse's Magnetic Field Operation Office to immediately contact the United Front Center. The announcement voice was turned up to the maximum volume. The echoes reverberated in the corridor. She looked at Lu Feng. "Are we going back to the lighthouse?" "I'll wait for orders." Lu Feng looked at the far end of the corridor, seeming to be contemplating something, then turned his gaze back to Anji. "Don't run around. Stick with me." Anji said, "Okay." Then the announcement said, "With the persons in charge of the command post, Joint Staff Department, Trial Court, and Combat Center, please proceed to the Communication Center on the 14th floor of the United Front. Please refrain from taking the elevators and use the passages to go upstairs and downstairs." Anji followed Lu Feng through the Communication Center's entrance. He heard voices inside. "Northern Base to Underground City Base, please respond. Northern Base to Underground City Base, please respond. Northern Base to Underground City Base, please respond." The dispatcher, wearing a pair of massive black headphones, was speaking. In front of him, more than a dozen display screens were spread out, upon which curves and parameters jumped. But in this communication channel, only he was talking. From the other side came nothing but empty electronical noises. The center of the hall was a middle-aged man in a black military uniform. His facial features were cold, and expression was dignified. The symbol on his epaulettes indicated that he was a lieutenant general in the military. Sorry about not being able to pronounce that correctly like that. I just can't right now. Upon seeing Lu Feng enter, he gave a nod in their direction. "You've come." There were some other soldiers who entered before and after Lu Feng. Though their military ranks and the departments they belonged to differed, their expressions were identically cold and solemn. The communication hall had chairs, so they dispersed and sat down. Anji quietly sat next to Lu Fang. Lieutenant General answered a communication, and after a short 30 seconds he hung up and said to the officers in the hall, "That was a notice from the lighthouse's magnetic field observation office. 5 minutes ago, the strength of the global magnetic field dropped to 0, but there were no abnormalities in the East Pole we are protecting. It is very clear that there was a major failure of the West Pole on the other side." She listened to the Lieutenant General's words. He knew the meaning the magnetic poles had to humans. The magnetic field protected everything on Earth. Once it was lost, cosmic radiation and solar winds would enter without resistance. In the short term, it would bring severe drought to the entire world. Exposed humans would receive radiation, contract various malignant diseases, then die or mutate. If there was a long-term lack of protection from the magnetic field, the entire planet's atmosphere would be dispersed by the solar winds, and then the world would turn into a desert of death. And of the 2 magnetic poles humans made, one was in the northern base and the other was in the underground city base. The 2 of them jointly maintained a weak magnetic field that covered the whole world and were indivisible. As soon as something went wrong with one of them, the other one would lose its function as well. There was no need for unnecessary communication between the 2 of them either. Every night, the aurora appearing in the sky would tell the other, "We still exist and are still safe." Now, the aurora was gone. Just then, the worker troubleshooting the equipment nearby said, "Reporting! The artificial magnetic field has disappeared, so the ionosphere is in chaos and shortwave communication is not feasible." The Lieutenant General frowned deeply. After 3 seconds of silence, he said, "At all costs, open the long-wave communication." "Yes, sir." In the era in which humans lost satellites and telecommunication, long-distance communication had become incomparably difficult. Only by using radio, shortwave radio communication, through the atmosphere's ionosphere, could signals be transmitted. But the artificial magnetic field was weaker than the original geomagnetic field, after all. Communication was already very unstable, and now that the magnetic field completely disappeared and the ionosphere had become completely disordered, communication was even more difficult. Long-wave communication was different. It was ground-based, using the earth and seawater as its medium. It was stable and reliable, but the activation cost was high. Only the most ancient code could be used to transmit messages. I wonder if they use Morse code then. It was also unidirectional, which meant that unless the other party also happened to activate long-wave communication at the same time, there would be no way to communicate. The message was transmitted layer by layer, and at last the communication received a feedback message that the long-wave communication device had been activated. The operator picked up the device. Codes with varying spacing and lengths made monotonous beeps as they were entered into the system in order, then uploaded to the communication channel. "Northern base to underground city base, please respond." A long silence. The underground city base is the most perfect construction amongst the 4 human bases, so it's very difficult to imagine that it would encounter a catastrophe, an officer said. If only it were just an equipment failure. Just as he finished speaking, a piercing electrical noise suddenly came from the receiver. With rustling sounds and scratching sounds, it was as chaotic as though it was coming from the boundless universe. Yet it also resembled the dying breaths of a huge monster. Everyone in the room stopped breathing until 20-odd seconds had passed. Beep, 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 beep. The message sounded, and the operator's entire body trembled. Practically threw himself onto the workbench and swiftly took notes. 5 minutes later, the Lieutenant General asked, "What did they say?" The operator's face was pale and lips were trembling. He looked at the paper with the signal notes and said, "They said the underground city base suffered an invasion of United Genozenics. xenogenics, and suffered heavy losses. They're currently repairing the magnetic pole. The ammunition reserves are at less than 1/5. Their thermonuclear weapon reserves are exhausted, and they have a shortage of soldiers requesting, he gritted his teeth, requesting support. Silence. Silence frequently meant facing a critical choice. To rescue or not to rescue. Is it still possible to contact the underground city? A voice broke the silence. There are no more responses. The meeting in conference room 1 has ended. With existing resources, if guaranteeing this entire city's survival, we could hold out for 3 to 10 days. And if not guaranteeing the entire city's survival, if only guaranteeing the Twin Towers and Garden of Eden's resource supplies, we can hold out for 15 to 30 days, regardless of climate factors. Under extreme circumstances, if core personnel are transferred to the Garden of Eden's underground shelter, could consider long-term survival. There's still a little hope. Another beat of silence. At last someone said, "Do we save them or not?" The lieutenant general looked around the room. After hearing the announcement to convene the meeting, Jean knew that the room was now filled with the highest-ranked officers from the command post, staff department, and combat center. Unlike the logistics and city defense personnel who were meeting in conference room 1, they all had to go to the front lines. It was just that even Anji knew how dangerous of a place the front lines would be this time. What was it that could render the most perfectly equipped human base and even the artificial magnetic pole unable to hold fast? Perhaps by the time reinforcements arrived, it would have already become a dead city. Perhaps before they even reached their destination, the troops would crash their planes in the storm and fall to the earth or into the Pacific Ocean. Or perhaps after the northern base used its own armament reserves to help the underground city base, the next time xenogenics united to attack this place, it would have lost its ability to resist. In the long silence, Anji heard Lu Feng say from next to him, "I'll go." The lieutenant general looked at him for a long time. "You're the best candidate," he said. Anji looked at Lu Feng. He knew why the lieutenant general said Lu Feng was the best candidate. In different regions on a continent, there was great differences between monsters. The northern base and the underground city base were separated by the entire Pacific Ocean, so the monsters' habits and methods of fighting them may be entirely unknown. Who could adapt the best to this kind of unknown? Someone who often went into the abyss. The monsters of the abyss were both chaotic and frenzied, with practically all kinds of mutation types present. Then another officer said, "I'm good at directing large-scale joint operations. I apply to go." AR 137th Captain, Lu Feng said. "Dispatcher, please inquire if he will voluntarily go." Mr. Hubbard agreed to go. The meeting adjourned, and upon leaving, the lieutenant general called Lu Feng back. "Who will take on the trial court's work?" "My adjutant." "Is he capable?" "Yes." After exiting, Sarang walked over. "The trial court's work area was in this exact building," he said in a low voice. "Colonel." Lu Feng gave a flat response. In the dim lighting, the rims of Sarang's eyes were slightly red. Lu Feng left, for he still had much to prepare. Sarang had Anji stay in the trial court's office to rest. Midway there, Anji made an excuse to go out and climbed up to the 13th floor. The entrance to D1344 was still lit up, and inside were the sounds of researchers talking. They said that there was no time left. Precisely because there was no time left, they had to seize every moment in completing all their research. She lowered his head. His body as a mushroom was too fragile and soft, so he couldn't rashly charge in after all. He returned to the main hall on the first floor. In the main hall, people came and went, and Sarang came over to his side. Saying nothing, Anji quietly watched everything happen. The throngs of people that were busy and moving back and forth, the continuously playing announcements, the flashing lights, and intermediate electricity supply. Intermediate electricity supply. All of this happened very quickly. The fate of humankind was as changeable as the aurora in the sky. Hang on. I gotta blow my nose again. I'm starting to get nasally. At 11 p.m., the equipment center reported that their tasks were completed. At midnight, the logistics division reported that their tasks were completed. At 1 a.m., the PL-1109 maintenance was completed, and the fighter plane formation set out. Muffled rumbling came from afar. The ground command needed a wide field of vision, so the isolation walls rose and scorching radiation and gusts of wind burst forth. Everyone backed up to the safe area in the depths of the main hall. A row of lights lit up in that direction, and Anji strove to look in that direction. Wing and nose lights delineated the fighter plane's massive contours. 3 PL-1109 fighter planes, along with an entire flight formation, smoothly traveled over. PL-1109. Anji knew it. The masterpiece of human science and technology. It had a hull that blocked out all radiation and an independent navigation system that needed no guidance from the magnetic field. Humans had long ago predicted and prepared for the coming era of calamity. It was just that nobody knew exactly what the effects of these predictions and preparations would be. He also finally knew why the base's roads were all made to be so smooth, sturdy, and wide. The military base that was tightly linked to the city center and massive buffer strips, the tarmacs and runways that were everywhere to be seen. The humans of 100 years ago gave everything they had to build them. All of this was not because of beauty or regularity, but because everything about this human base's main city was for responding to possible war. Another gate opened, and a few officers in black combat uniforms walked out. Amidst the handful of people, Anji saw Lu Feng with only a glance. This person's figure was imposing and upright, his figure neat and tidy. Unlike the lofty grace and coldness of the trial court's uniform, although the shape was similar, the combat uniform seemed more casual, which magnified his bastardly characteristics. I think he means handsome, but he's kind of pissed off at him right now. That's funny. But tonight, Anji had no plans to call him a bastard. Lu Feng was a very good human. See? Next sentence confirmed it. Lu Feng walked over towards him, his original uniform coat draped over the crook of his arm, and Sarang accepted it. Follow Sarang. Don't run around, Lu Feng said as he looked at Anji. Then he said to Sarang, keep an eye on him. Clearly, it was a very simple handful of words, but Anji felt that he heard a threat from them, as if once he ran around, he would suffer punishment. Frowning, he looked up at this man. Lu Feng reached out and tousled Anji's hair. His gaze wasn't as cold or as malicious as usual. Anji even thought that it was perhaps a bit gentle. He'd made up his mind to go to the underground city base on the other side of the world. Anji felt that he ought to say something, such as telling him to stay safe or take care of himself, those sorts of things. He opened his mouth and then felt that the colonel was probably accustomed to this kind of life. He seemed able to take care of everything, so there was no need to tell him. In the end, Anji only said, I made mushroom soup tonight. No matter how good the thermos was, having left it until now, it wouldn't be as tasty as when it was piping hot. There was a slight smile in Lu Feng's eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Make it for me again when I return." That pair of eyes, those eyes with the same color as firefly glow in the deepest parts of the jungle, looked at Anji. He seemed to lean down slightly, and for a moment, Anji felt that Lu Feng wanted to get close to him. But that feeling was fleeting. "I may not be able to return," Lu Feng said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Take care of yourself." She responded with an affirmative sound. He watched Lu Feng turn around and leave without looking back, walking into the makeshift boarding bridge. How many times had he now watched Lu Feng's figure depart? He couldn't remember. He didn't know why this person was always able to constantly move forward, could shoot his compatriots without the slightest hesitation, and also sacrifice his own life at any given moment. Outside, a sandstorm arrived with the great winds. The night covered them, making the flying dust and grit seem like a boundless night fog. Precisely this boundless darkness and moonlight, the engines buzzed to life, and the pitch-black PL-1109 fighter plane smoothly took off. Spread its wings that were like a massive bird. In Anji's sight, the further and higher it got, the smaller it became, turning into a black speck that was difficult to see before finally disappearing into the resplendent Milky Way that spanned across the skies. There was a distant roar, which was a sonic boom as the fighter planes accelerated again. Anji couldn't find it at all anymore. Everyone looked up at the boundless night sky. In the hall, there was a respectful silence, and only after a long while did the people disperse. Ji still stood there, and the soft footsteps came from behind him. It was Sarang. Sometimes I'll think, why did the Colonel choose me as a successor? What kind of characteristics and guideline does he think an arbiter should have? Sarang said. Now I think, contrary to what people believe, it's not coldness, but mercy. Humankind's interests take precedence over all else. It's not kindness to a single person, it's kindness to the fate of all humankind. That is the source of unwavering conviction. Sarang's voice was very soft and slightly raspy. Sincerely hope that the people 100 years from now won't have to face everything we are currently facing, if humans still exist at that time. Anji said nothing. He lifted his head to look at the star-studded night sky, boundless, resplendent sea. Sarang draped the military coat over him. When the aurora lights up again, the Colonel will return. Guess what? Hang on. We are done with chapter 26, and I think we might be on the last chapter. Let me see. Yeah, we are. We're on the last chapter. Chapter 27. Thank you so much for staying with me. I know this is a bit longer than usual, but I'm excited. That means we can start the new one on Tuesday. Aw, thank you for the hearts. Okay. Knew it was a good idea to make my big tea tonight. Got my big one. Okay. It really is so good. I'm not generally a sci-fi person, but I have really been enjoying this book. It's so well written. And I'm really glad that I ended up buying it when I did, because I haven't said this probably since the first one, but this is actually also my first time reading this, so I'm experiencing it with you. And on that note, we shall begin chapter 27. The relationship between you two is very complicated. Although wrong, it is still correct. On the walls of the corridor connecting the work hall of the trial court, the training area, one side had humankind's interests take precedence over all else, while the other side had this sentence written. Beneath the sentence was a row of silver picture frames. The first picture frame was blank, but further along, the second picture frame held a black and white photo depicting an officer around 30 years old with handsome and symmetrical features. He was dressed in the arbiter's uniform, and the dates of his birth and death were engraved upon the walls beneath the picture frame. He died 7 years prior at the age of 36. At the next picture frame, there was also a black and white photo with dates of birth and death. Anji walked forward, and the next photo and birth and death dates were similar. The years in which they lived gradually went back in time. Thus, Anji knew that these were photos taken to commemorate successive arbiters. The black picture frame on the very end was undoubtedly left for Lu Feng. With that thought, Anji's pace slowed slightly, and an indescribable weight pressed down upon his heart. If it was possible, he hoped that Lu Feng's photo wouldn't be hung up so soon. Just like how tonight, the moment Lu Feng boarded the plane, he hoped that this person could remain here in a safe place. But Lu Feng had his own choices to make. Following Sarang, he continued walking forward, and at the end of the photo gallery, a strange spectacle appeared. On the light gray wall, there was a rectangular area that was wider, the same size as the picture frame. There were nail holes in all four corners of the white area. Looked like this place also had a picture frame once, but it had been taken down. Below it, the place that originally was engraved with the name and birth and death dates had also been scraped off, leaving behind only a few molted marks. Anji tried to make it out, but he could only see that it was a string of letters beginning with a capital P. Seeing that he had stopped here, Sarang explained. It said that this was the first arbiter, and the person who proposed the arbiter's code and established the trial system. Anji asked, "Was his photo taken down?" Sarang said. In the end, he questioned the rationality of the arbiter's system and betrayed the base. Anji nodded. Human minds were very difficult to figure out. He didn't inquire more deeply. Sarang got him settled in a break room. The geomagnetic field had disappeared, and everything had become chaotic. Logistics Division and Emergency Response Division were presumably in great tumult, and the base's other residents were panicking, only able to sleep and wait for the military's upcoming shelter arrangements. There were numerous footsteps upstairs. Next door, Sarang was contacting someone, seeming to be arranging the trial court's follow-up work. In the pitch-black room, the outside wasn't visible. Anji could only hear his own heartbeat. Strangely, as if having some odd feeling, he lifted his head and looked into the depths of the darkness. That feeling was strange to describe. He seemed to have felt some massive wave. He, Sarang, everyone, the entire human base, along with everything in this world, were all trivial parts of that indescribable wave, trembling and changing in its wake, and generating minute ripples. In the youngling's textbook, there was a saying called the current of fate, and he thought it was very fitting. The only part that wasn't fitting was that the wave seemed to exist around the entire world and wasn't an empty metaphor or imagining. Right at that moment, his communicator rang. It was a call from the doctor. The doctor asked him, "Lu Feng has taken off. Where are you?" Anji truthfully told him. "As long as you're safe," the doctor said. Just finished the lighthouse's emergency meeting, so now I'll be heading back to the laboratory to rest for the night. You get some good rest as well. Okay, Anji replied. The doctor seemed to be climbing a set of stairs. Only after a while had passed did he say, I was thinking about Sinan's behavior this morning. He warned Lily to go back to the Garden of Eden. Could it be that he predicted the disappearance of the magnetic field? Different species have different sensory organs, and some organisms are sensitive to magnetic fields. Anji said, Perhaps. For some thought he said, But it's so far. Of course he knew every single species was different. In the abyss, some monsters had extremely keen hearing. Some could detect the scent of prey from thousands of kilometers away. But if they were to say Sinan sensed the xenogenic invasion of the underground city base all the way on the other side of the globe from the northern base, it seemed a bit unreasonable, for xenogenics did not have long-wave communication technology. The doctor did not respond to him. From the other side, there only came uneven breaths, and Anji thought that perhaps he was walking. But 3 minutes later, the doctor still did not respond. There was only the sound of his breath speeding up. With this sound playing in the darkness, Anji felt an inexplicable uneasiness. Doctor? Anji called out. Still no response. He frowned. Right at that moment, he heard the doctor quickly say from the other end, Have Sarang pick up. Anji swiftly walked out of the break room. Sarang accepted the communicator, and after calling out, Doctor, he frowned deeply and swiftly said, I'll be right over. Then he immediately picked up the gun on the table, called a few men, and strode out. Anji took a look in the direction he went in, and chose to follow. But their speed was too quick, and his own speed climbing the stairs was too slow, so he was a step behind. By the time he arrived in the corridor where the doctor's laboratory was, he heard a gunshot from the depths, immediately followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. The doctor was standing in the middle of the corridor, and Anji walked over to him. I saw that his walking posture wasn't quite right from far off. The doctor gasped for breath, his pupils dilated and face pallid, the very picture of someone who was badly shaken. Anji looked forward and saw Sarang put away his gun. The person who fell to the ground was the doctor's assistant. Just this afternoon, he'd been working with the doctor, helping him repeatedly check the footage of Sinan. Sarang said to the doctor, Infection confirmed. Was it exposure to an experiment? Infection. Anji promptly thought of this place's sole source of infection, Sinan. Impossible, the doctor said. He didn't have the authority to open the glass cover, so he couldn't come into contact with the xenogenic. I'll go inside and take a look. Don't! The doctor abruptly raised a voice. Don't go over there. Sarang stopped walking and looked at the doctor. Do you remember how I once said there was a day where we wouldn't need to come into contact with xenogenics at all to be infected? The doctor's voice shook. It's too abnormal. We must prepare for the worst. Sarang frowned. How will you prove your view? There's no way to prove it. The doctor shook his head. However, you all also know that after injecting a monster's interstitial fluid into the test animal's tail, genetic changes can be observed in the animal's head at the same time. Those interstitial fluids haven't participated in body fluid circulation at all, yet the genes throughout the animal's body have already changed. Sorry about that. Interstitial. We're just going to call that word for a loss. Basically, once it enters its fluid into the test animal, changes happen where it's not circulated already instantly, it sounds like. Since even this kind of thing can happen, then why can't infection occur even without coming into contact with a monster? With those words, a shudder ran through his body. Sarang, he said, his voice completely hoarse. Downstairs are all live xenogenic samples. There are at least 100 staff members there. Sarang's expression was heavy. I'll go down right away. Protect yourself, the doctor said. Within the effective range, the further away you can stay from all the living things there, the better. He didn't say xenogenics, nor did he say humans, but rather living things. Sarang nodded. With speedy movements, they dispersed downstairs. In the silent corridor, only Anji and the doctor remained. Seeming to have lost his strength, the doctor leaned against the ice-cold wall, and Anji supported him. After a silence, the doctor suddenly spoke. You aren't afraid? He shook his head. Doctor looked at him. On you, there seems to be a kind of something that the people of this era don't have, the doctor said. Saying nothing, Anji quietly listened to him continue. His gaze lingered for a long time on Anji, and then he took a soft breath, lips trembling slightly as if he obtained some extraordinary inspiration. Then he said, You're so innocent that it's like you're a bystander. He said, Everyone lives in terror, but you're very calm, standing out from everyone else. With those words, he seemed to smile. I know why Lu Feng likes being with you. Anji looked at the doctor. The doctor's youthful face showed a faint haggardness. He seemed to be a bit tired. She asked, Is there something I can help you with? Thank you. The doctor looked into his eyes, and there was a slight quivering at the end of his sentence. Just live safely. That's enough. Anji thought for a while, and then said, I'll try my best. He didn't say anything else. In the corridor, the doctor's words echoed as he talked to himself. No physical contact and no aerial transmission. Can such a thing truly happen? Nobody replied to him. However, a clear gunshot came from downstairs. Then there came a second sound. A third. The sounds didn't stop, reverberating for a long time in the building. In the wake of one gunshot after another, the theoretical framework humans used to explain the world was declared to have utterly collapsed. The doctor's hand clutched Anji's arm, and his fingers were trembling. Why? The gunshots stopped, and a scattered few people walked upstairs with Sarang bringing up the rear. These are the ones who haven't been infected? Sarang replied. Yes. Anji heard the doctor ask the survivors about their whereabouts today. There were no issues with eating, drinking, or breathing, for everything was uniformly supplied by the lighthouse. Even the air was brought in by the ventilation system. If there was an issue with any one amongst these three things, the entire lighthouse would fall. But they had one thing in common. During this period of time, since the magnetic field disappeared, none of them had been in close contact with the experimental subjects. Some had been in the office sorting records the entire time, while some had gone to other floors to participate in meetings and just returned, such as Dr. G himself. And the staff members who had been infected also had one thing in common. They were all people who had been in close contact with the xenogenics, though this kind of contact was not necessarily true contact, but rather spatial proximity with monsters or xenogenics. For example, one researcher's assistant had spent the entire afternoon in a small office immersed in writing code, adapting a certain data model, but he was still judged to have been genetically infected. The only suspicious thing were the two reptile monsters being raised in the laboratory on the other side of the wall from him. Sarang requested guidance from the military. Using the floor where the Xenogenic Research Center was as the axis, closed-style checks had to be carried out on the 3 floors above and below. All personnel were prohibited from entering. Food, water, and air may all be sources of infection. The trial court's break room, Anji and the doctor shared a room. The doctor said to himself while facing the white wall, "If only that was it. But it just isn't." "Is it radiation?" he then said. If every monster was a source of radiation at the very beginning, the radiation was very weak, so only those who were heavily injured would get infected. Later, infection would happen with even minor wounds, and then the radiation strength gradually increased. So long as one stays near a monster, their genes will experience instantaneous change because of the radiation. Anji thought that what he said made a lot of sense, but right away he saw the doctor bury his face in his palm and take a deep breath, his bearing that of a man on the verge of a breakdown. "But our instruments cannot detect it." G thought that the doctor was about to go mad. Putting himself in the doctor's shoes, he understood the source of his madness. Regarding the research of monsters, what made researchers suffer wasn't how complicated it was, how many resources it needed, or how dangerous it was, but rather that even now, they didn't know exactly what they were facing. Like a man walking in the dark, having lost even his last crutch, he knew that the cliff edge was not far away, but he didn't know exactly when he would lose his footing. He saw the doctor slowly lift his head, his blue eyes slightly unfocused and the muscles in his face trembling. That was a kind of despairing dread and terror, as if he was facing some massive, frightening, and indescribable existence. In front of him was a blank, white wall. The scariest thing in the world was the unknown. Ain't that the truth? Anji poured out a cup of water for him. The doctor drank it and forced a smile. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know how many more days the base's water supply can last." The doctor's words weren't wrong. From the night when the aurora disappeared, the entire base entered a state of emergency shelter. Outside was the solar wind and radiation, so nobody could leave the buildings. The heat outside traveled in through the thick walls. The temperature indoor was at least 30 degrees Celsius, and there were no methods of temperature control. It was frighteningly dry, and electricity was only used to keep the basic equipment running. Every day at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., the base would regularly distribute a piece of hardtack or a packet of nutrition tablets along with a bottle of drinking water. 3 days later, bottles of water were distributed only in the morning. And this was the Twin Towers, the place where the military command center and scientific researchers were. Sometimes, Anji would think, if the Twin Towers' resources supply was already been reduced to this point, what would it be like in the ordinary residence buildings outside? The 1109 fighter planes need 12 hours to fly from the northern base to the underground city base, and the return trip likewise needs 12 hours. 120 hours have passed, and we still haven't received any news whatsoever. The doctor said this to him while calculating some complicated formulas with paper and pen. Emotionally, I believe in Lu Feng, but now we must prepare for the worst. 5 days later, the nutrition tablets were gone as well. The elevator stopped, and G quietly slipped out of the trial court, and when he climbed up the stairs, he encountered at least 3 couples kissing various corners. Perhaps they weren't lovers either, but at least they were difficult to tear apart now. Even though I walk through the shadow... Okay, we're going to start that over because it's a classic. We're going to take a sip of tea beforehand so it's good. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Certainly, goodness and faithfulness will follow me all the days of my life, and my dwelling will be in the house of the Lord forever. On the 13th floor, he passed a meeting room inside, which a dozen white military officers and researchers had gathered and were reciting the Bible. Inside, at least half of them had tissues stuffed up their nostrils, for the high temperature and dryness made humans get nosebleeds very easily. Actually, high temperatures and dryness were even more unsuitable for mushroom survival. These days, Anji hadn't even slept well. Sometimes he would feel himself bobbing up and down in the current of fate, and sometimes he would feel like he had been laid out in the sun, about to be baked dry. It was difficult to wake up, and he would also feel very hungry. But he could wait, for it didn't matter. Just this morning the doctor had said to him, "Although this situation is becoming more and more dire, you seem to be becoming more and more calm." Anji was indeed not terrified. He was a calm mushroom. These past 5 days he quietly stayed in the Twin Towers, going in and out with the doctor and Sarang. So many people got accustomed to the sight of him. He observed the dim red light that indicated the operational status of the surveillance cameras and pricked up his ears to listen to each announcement. Just yesterday, that light dimmed. And just this morning, the doctor was informed that because of insufficient energy, all research activities were terminated. Anji softly took a deep breath as he stood in front of the door to laboratory D1344. It was silent on the other side of the door, with even the beeping sounds of the machine's operations having stopped. He had finally waited until those researchers had left. The laboratory door was tightly shut, and the sensor at the entrance flashed with a weak light. He took out Lu Feng's ID card. The underground city. Upon the open ground, the upper half of the artificial magnetic pole stood. On a patch of sandy yellow soil, it resembled a grand tombstone. This place's geographical location was excellent, for there were tall mountains on all sides that blocked windstorms and cold waves. The middle was a flat plain, and the geological structure was stable and solid, sufficient to support the construction of unimaginable underground fortifications. The underground city's surface area and volume was comparable to the metropolis from the time when humankind was at its zenith. In the beginning, when mankind's four bases were taking shape, some people predicted that if there came a day humans could not hold out, then the underground city base would definitely be the last one to fall. But right now, this open plain was covered with blood. Blood from monsters, from xenogenics, and from humans. On top of the bloodstains were dismembered limbs, cut off hands, and the remains of heavy weaponry. A black fighter plane flew over the ground, dropping several powerful bombs. Dull explosions sounded, and the monsters howled deafeningly, but they were soon drowned out in the billowing smoke. The fighter plane increased its elevation and steadily circled in the air. Lu Feng, holding a walkie-talkie in his hand, said, "The monsters on the ground have been eliminated." Next to him was Hubbard. This legendary mercenary team captain from the outer city looked at the nearby entry passageway, the underground city, and said, "The inside will be difficult to deal with." Lu Feng looked over there as well. He didn't say anything, tacitly agreeing with Hubbard's viewpoint. For these past few days, he and the captain had coordinated command of the aerial operations and established sufficient tacit understanding. Moreover, they were originally the kind of people who went the deepest into the front lines of the abyss, so nobody understood better than they the habits and lethality of those things. The underground city was easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was a sufficiently safe and formidable bastion. It naturally had the advantage of guarding against radiation. But its structure also destined it to be one thing. Once xenogenics breached it, the interior would inevitably be a field of chaos. And now it had been breached. What they're most lacking in is firepower. Their birth rate can't keep up, and so they are short on soldiers. Thus, they can only increase their expenditure of armaments. They overdrew in advance, so now they have no way of effectively defending. Its hawk-like eyes narrowed slightly. "We've brought enough and arrived on time, so we have a decent chance of winning." Right at that moment, a voice came from the walkie-talkie. "The underground city thanks you for your generous support." The operator's voice was trembling. "However, out of the principle of humanitarianism, must inform our compatriots from the northern base. At present, countless infection has already been observed within the base, and unpredictable infection may occur at any time and place." "The northern base has received it," Lu Feng said, interrupting the operator. "Please prepare for ground support." Hubbard frowned deeply. "Have the flight formation hover for now. I'll lead some men down." "I'll go," Hubbard said. "By the sound of what they're saying, the inside is more dangerous than we imagined, and there may be no coming back after going down." "You don't have this obligation." "But I don't really have any worries." Lu Feng's tone was flat. "I don't either." But Hubbard smiled and asked in return, "You don't?" Lu Feng met his gaze. No emotion whatsoever could be seen from his cold green eyes, but this time he said nothing. "Sometimes you'll look out that porthole, and when you do, you look for a very long time," Hubbard said. "I left a person at the base." Lu Feng leaned against the porthole, his arms crossed. "Bullet I killed someone with hangs around his neck." "What person of his did you kill?" Lu Feng didn't reply. "Putting it like that, he bears enmity against you," Hubbard said, but he seemed to recall something. "I met a boy who had one of your bullet shells and asked me if I knew its origin." The corners of Lu Feng's lips curved up. Hubbard said, "Then the relationship between you two is very complicated." "Perhaps." Lu Feng walked towards the exit. "My relationship with everyone is very complicated." His voice was cold as he said to the pilot, "Prepare to taxi." Hubbard didn't stop him this time. He looked at Lu Feng's back, deep in thought. Under the massive and blood-red sunset on the western skies, the flight formation landed and the cabin doors opened. Lu Feng walked out of the PL-1109 and towards the sprawling and blood-soaked city under the ground. The northern base. Right when Anji was about to put the ID card up to the sensor, he heard footsteps behind him and he turned around. It was soldiers on routine patrol, followed by a familiar-looking judge. The judge looked at him and said, "How come you're here?" He dropped his gaze slightly. "I'm getting something for the doctor." "The doctor is still doing research," the judge said. Anji made a soft affirmative noise and said nothing else. The judge didn't ask further. Instead, he said, "Go back soon. The military has work to do today." He said, "Thank you." They walked past, and Anji took a deep breath and pressed the ID card to the sensor. Fortunately, the access control system had not yet been shut off. With a click, the door unlocked. Anji entered. The door hinge squeaked because of friction, and after he walked in, he promptly closed the door. In the dim lighting, the dark shadows of the massive instruments flickered, and in the corner of the room, the cylindrical tank stood quietly. A faint light beneath the tank illuminated it, and a cluster of small bubbles had just emerged from below and was floating on the top. Anji held his breath. Before opening the door, he had prepared for the worst. Getting caught, the spore having already been transferred, the people being present in the laboratory. Now, his heart was just about to stop beating entirely. Until his gaze passed through the glass tank and through the pale green culture solution, and he saw the small white mass suspended all alone in the middle. His breath trembled, the corner of his lips curled up, and his heart thudded hard. He wanted to throw himself over there right away, but because of his excessive mood swing, he was practically unable to move. Within the liquid beneath the dim light, the snow-white little thing seemed as if it were wandering about on the deep sea floor, and she looked at it without blinking. That very moment he saw the spore, which had been quietly floating, pause. Then the hypae abruptly stretched out, or perhaps using exploded to describe it would be more fitting. Then It floated towards him at a speed that definitely could not be considered slow, but suddenly paused at the glass wall, as if it had struck it. Anji took long strides over to the glass tank, pressing his hand and then his whole body against it. His spore was also firmly pressed against the glass wall, and the hype touched him uneasily through the layers of glass, movement clearly showing that it wanted to get closer to him. Anji couldn't resist smiling. When Lu Feng was near, it seemed just like that spore didn't see Anji, but now it recognized him. Reluctant to even blink, he watched the spore extend its slender and fragile hype towards him, yet due to the glass obstructing it, could only try even harder to press itself in his direction, practically turning into a small white pancake on the inner side of the tank. Every single hype was emphasizing how much it wanted to get close to Anji. I just gotta say it. This is like his spore is so cute. Like it's so baby. Like he sounds adorable. He, she, it, them, whoever they identify as. I don't judge. Man. Anji leaned against it. A long-lost comfort surrounded him, but it was also separated by a layer of unbreakable film. He had to rescue... Very baby, yes. He had to rescue it from the tank. Anji tore himself away from the tank with difficulty and came to the side where there was a console. Based on the common rules of human machines, he tried pressing the biggest round button. The console screen lit up as expected, and the indicator light on the card slot on one side lit up. He swiped Lu Feng's card again, and the indicator light turned green. Throughout the entire base, this man's authority was virtually unchecked. But right away, facing the buttons, they were identical shaped, and only had some complex symbols on them. Some complex symbols on them. Anji fell into a daze. How could he open the tank? His fingers hovered over the console. At last he steeled himself and pressed the button in the very center. 3 seconds later, the water in the tank began to surge, and the spore was helplessly swept here and there in the current before finally spinning in the middle of the tank. Looking at the helplessly spinning little mass, felt his own head about tumbled around and around, clutched at his heart and pressed the first button. A red laser lit up at the very top of this tank. Even Anji, who was standing nearby, felt the heat. The spore's hype exploded, and then it feebly sank down, seeming as if it'd be dried out in the next second. Then it exploded again after a while. He suspected that it was silently He frowned in distress. This was the sort of torment what the spore underwent in the human laboratory every day. But he had no time to think about anything else and pressed another button. The red glow changed into pulses of light, and the spore helplessly exploded again and again. He swiftly pressed a button far away. This time the red light disappeared, and he sighed in relief. But in the following moment, a buzzing sound and a blue ion sparks flared to life in the tank. Then the surface of the water began to tremble slightly. And the spore also trembled in the water as if it had gone mad. He was taken aback. He had electrified this poor baby spore. Oh! Flustered, he pressed one button after another, and finally, with a loud noise, the pale green culture solution slowly drained out of the container. Anji pressed a button next to it, and with a click, the lid on top of the tank opened. The tank was too tall, so he moved a chair over and stood on it, then finally reached the top of the tank. But more than half the culture solution had drained out by then, and the spore had no way of floating to that height. He saw the spore press against the glass wall and slowly crawled upward against it. It slipped down as it climbed, and after sliding down a bit, it continued climbing up. The little thing was not yet fully mature, yet it had inherited his ability to move independently. Anji reached out, and his arm and fingers turned into fluttering snow-white hype that descended along the container's inner wall and came into contact with the spore. At that exact moment, it was like an electrical current ran through his body, and he had been reborn. He had taken back a part of himself, so there must be a strange wave enveloping him. Holding that mass, he carefully fished it out, and all of the spore's hypae that were scattered outside were obediently tucked back in. The spore rolled over amidst his hypae. Unji's eyes curved as he smiled at it. His hypae connected to its hypae, and he carefully fitted it into his own body. The spore's body also relaxed completely and melded with his body. A euphoric emotion was transmitted to Anji's mind, for it had finally returned to the place where it ought to be. The human's culture liquid is useless. Only with the nourishment of the adult would it continue to grow until maturity. This time, there were no bastards to dig it out again, although he didn't know why the spore would get close to that guy of its own volition. In truth, the spore not getting close to him that day was a good thing, for once it expressed an inclination to get close to him, it would be promptly observed by the researchers. Then his identity would inevitably come under suspicion. Thus, Anji was one-sidedly convinced that his spore had uncommon intelligence. I think he was just very distracted by a pretty boy. I'm just saying. With the return of the spore, the hollow in his body was finally filled, and all uneasy things instantly settled like dust. There was a feeling that could not possibly be described, like being reborn. Anji walked over to the window and pressed the button, raising the metal plate. Eye-watering light shone in, and he squinted. Outside, at the end of the wind-blown sands, amidst the first golden rays of the dawn, a resplendent red sun burst forth. Anji slowly turned his head to look back at the silvery white laboratory. Machines were arranged side by side. Individual electrical cables were distinct from each other, and test tube stands on top of the goods cabinet were arranged in a particularly neat manner. From this laboratory, he could imagine what the entire base looked like. This was the human's base. Its past, present, and future all had nothing to do with him. His hand curled around the windowsill, his knuckles turned white, and he pushed open the transparent three-layered glass window with a burst of strength. A gap the size of a finger's width opened, and scorching hot winds carrying grit blew in, followed by a prickling pain in his fingers. Then the wind and atmosphere outside was ubiquitous, intense radiation from the cosmos. That colossal wave contained countless tiny ripples. He seemed to hear the abyss calling him back. He could leave now, depart from this place, go outside, and return to the abyss. The outside was likewise cruel. He didn't know if he would be able to survive, but he had gotten his spore back, so he wasn't afraid of anything anymore. Anji gently pressed his left hand to his abdomen, rested his forehead against the windowsill, and closed his eyes. A slight shudder ran through his entire body. He took back his right hand that was curled around the windowsill and exerted his strength in the opposite direction. With a gentle thunk, the window closed again. Then the radiation-proof metal layer closed immediately after. He took a few breaths. His forehead pressed against the metal sheet, and his fingers slowly curled up at his side, as if he had made a difficult choice. As the radiation was blocked out, the prickling pain on his body also gradually receded, just like that night when Lu Feng held him and used his own body as a shield before rolling away from the area with the radiation. In truth, if it had been anyone else, Lu Feng would have done the same, but it was precisely because that was the case that he deeply remembered the image, as vivid as each memory of Lu Feng's departing figure. He walked out through the laboratory door, and right as he did, two soldiers walked past in the corridor. The pair of patrolling soldiers from earlier had walked away, and now it was other people. Anji met their gazes and gave a closed-lipped smile in greeting, then turned and walked towards the staircase. In the dim staircase, he could only hear his own heartbeat. One thump after another, faster than usual. When humans felt fear, their hearts would beat fast. But what exactly he was fearful of, he didn't know either. He couldn't keep it hidden for long, he knew. Once order was restored and research began anew, it would definitely be possible to figure out the sequence of events of the humans important laboratory losing something. He had to leave. The earlier, the better. But he couldn't keep himself from taking a sharp, cool object out of his shirt pocket. It was the badge that Lu Fang had pinned to his coat, which Anji had taken off. He held it in his hand, thinking that once the aurora lit up and he heard the news of the PL-1109 returning, he'd leave then, if such a day came. There wasn't anything good in this city, only potato soup was quite nice. If it weren't for his sport always wanting to get close to Lu Fang, he would have left long ago. And that is the end of book 1. That was pretty good. I am looking forward to book 2. Like, really excited about book 2. Yay! We did it! Thank you for staying with me. I know this is like an hour longer than I usually read, but I was like, we're so close. But we did it. We did it. Woo. But yeah, that was book 1. I really like this. This was such a good read, and I can't wait to start book 2, which I have right here. Here we go. I will start this on Tuesday at 8 CST, so normal time on Tuesday. Yay, thank you for the hearts, and I also can't wait, Mars Rover. Yes, I am going to continue reading other books. I think, well, the ones I have The Whole Golden Terrace. I've read that one before. I have The Imperial Uncle, and I have Peach Blossom Debt, and I have The First in the Dark. Those are all the ones from Peach Blossom House, or Peach Flower House Publishing, that I have. So I'm planning to do the Peach Flower House books first, and then branch off into other Danmei series. I really love the fish books, the Disabled Tyrant and His Beloved Pet Fish. They're one of my favorite series. I will probably eventually do Modao Zushi, the Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, because that is also a favorite. But that's going to be like a long time in the future. We have a couple of series to get through first. But part of the reason I started doing this is because I have a number of the books from Peach Flower House, and I think everybody should have access to literature and shouldn't have to pay through the nose to get it. And I know people are getting either scammed or scalped with a lot of these books. And I have them, and I have time. So I also just enjoy doing this. This is a lot of fun for me. So I hope you all are enjoying it too. Oh, I'm glad you're looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to the 4th fish book that's coming out this month, the 4th and final. I have actually waited and haven't found the raw translation online, which is pretty good for me because I want to experience it through the book. But yeah, no, the fish books are some of my favorites, and most of the pictures over there are actually Wuxian and Lanwanji. We've got Foxian and Dragon G, and our Yiling Patriarch is up there. I've got some Heaven officials. There's our prince holding baby Hu Chao. But yeah, no. I very much look forward to doing this and look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday. Oh, since we did this tonight, we can either do this on Tuesday or we can do this tonight. But up to you. So someone gets to make that choice in the chat while I drink my tea. But yeah, thank you so much, all of you, for joining me. I may also do, like, once I'm done with this, I can do a poll on what you guys want to read next, because it doesn't have to be Golden Terrace. I think there's someone else who actually has done a reading of Golden Terrace, so it's out there. So you can also wait on that one. I just know I enjoyed it. It's a bit more political, ancient political. Like, I think it might actually be based on a period of China, if I'm remembering correctly, which I think is fascinating. But I'd have to refresh on that. But yeah. If there are any questions or things people want to share, we can do that. But I'll probably be closing this out in a couple more minutes if nobody else has anything to say. Because I personally am very happy that I did this on a Friday, because this was a lot of fun and allowed us to finish it today. Yeah. It's definitely one of those that's more heavy on the politics, but it's also so well written. And I love how feisty the relationship is. Like, they're so sassy with each other. I enjoy sass. But hopefully everyone had a good day today, and if not, hopefully you enjoyed this and you have a fantastic weekend. Great that. I can see how they could, if the beginning is a bit slow. Like, there are some books, Danmei books, that just have that slow start. That was actually me for Heaven Officials. It was definitely a slow start for me. And I know that's so many people's favorite, so I really hope people are kind when I say that. Like, I grew to really enjoy the book, but it definitely was a slow start. I was actually a bit annoyed with our prince in the beginning, just with his "I can save everyone" attitude. And I mean, he definitely went through life and all that, but, like, it was definitely a process. So I can see how people with Golden Terrace, where it's not as adventure focused or flowery, it's a bit more mystery, historical intrigue, more like politicky. So yeah. Yeah. It definitely got really interesting, and I enjoy it. There are just so many books. I also ended up was lucky to read it when it was that was actually the last of MXTX that I ended up reading. My first was Scum Villain. My second was Modao Zushi. And then it was Heaven Officials, and that was right around the time when they released the last book. So I got to read them all together. So that helped. But yeah, there are a lot. I've read all of Husky. The ending gets a bit confusing. I actually read it before they started releasing, because I found it on probably a very probably spammy rough translation website, and I was intrigued that there was a dog on the front, and I was like, huh, this is really big, and a lot of people seem to like it, so I started reading it, and I think some of the translation, especially near the end, was a bit of a mess. So I'm enjoying reading it actually translated. Definitely a big punch in the feels for a lot of it. Yeah. But anyway, I know it's been a lot longer of a stream, so I think I will probably call it, and we will do this on Tuesday before we start reading our lovely little mushroom 2 Revelations. Goodbye, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend and sweet dreams. Good night.